6:09 p.m. First, public comment. Are you going to make a comment tonight, Anne?
No.
No comment for you. Is anyone joining us remotely that would like to make a public comment? If so, please put your name and address in the chat. And if anybody is calling in by telephone and you would like to make a public comment, just unmute yourself and state your name and address.
Hi, this is Deborah Wood, and I'm not on the chat. I'm calling in, but my address is 5 Alpine Road, Manchester, and I wanted to make a comment when it was my turn.
Okay, you may make your public comment, please. We try to limit our comments to 3 minutes for a total of 20 in the public comment section, and please go right ahead.
Okay. I had reached out wondering if there was anything we could do about obtaining a librarian, or at least finding something creative so that our middle school and high school students could have access to our school library, and if it was possible to start having the kids be able to take books out so they can bring them home and read them. I have just recently learned that our children don't have access to our library, especially the middle schoolers. I was told at parent-teacher night that they were not allowed in, and then when I inquired about it, I was told, yes, that's correct, and we don't have a librarian at this time, and there's not money in the budget, and we don't know when we will be able to have a librarian.
Okay,
So I was just looking to just try and how can we fix this? How can we make this better? If we can't hire a librarian, could we maybe use parent volunteers? Could we have it staffed when teachers have free periods or study halls, and they can, if they're correcting papers or reviewing work? Could we open this up to our seniors and our juniors, our high school students who need community hours, and have them help staff the library? And lastly, would we be able to job share between our 3 schools, between the 2 elementary schools and at least the middle school? I'm not sure what the high school status is.
All right, thank you for your public comment. I know in public comment during a school committee meeting, we tend to take public comment regarding things that are on the agenda for that night as per our policy, but also it's not set up to be a back and forth dialogue. However, we appreciate you bringing this forward, and just for the edification of all, we did receive your email about this. Pam may choose to speak to this in her report as well. So stay tuned, and thank you for reaching out.
We'll answer what we can.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have public comment? Is there anyone else in the chat? Okay, seeing none, we will close the public comment section for tonight. And next is our student report. We have Diego Sanson with us.
How's everyone doing? It's good to be here in person finally after it feels like forever. But no, everything's good. It's been a really good couple weeks at the high school, I would say. Like, awesome. Spirit Week was super fun. We had the pep rally, which was awesome, and then it ended with the football game, which was also super fun. I went to that. So all of that's good. It's becoming more normal again, which I'm pretty pumped about. Like, Spirit Week was really awesome. Like, everyone just seemed happy. Like, all the teachers dressed up and stuff for like costumes. So that was super fun. It was good. Kind of switching gears a little bit. Something that I realized, so I got my MCAS scores back in the mail, and I know everyone else. So I looked at my MCAS scores. Dad's like, Diego, like, what is up with your math score? And I was like, like, that's weird. So I look at the math score, and like, everything looks good generally. And then in the geometry section, so I think I got like 2 or 3 wrong in all of the other categories of the math. And then in the geometry section, I got half of them wrong. And then I was like, oh, like, that's school the next day. And I talked to my friends about it, and we were sitting there at lunch. I'm like, oh, did you get your MCAS scores back? Yeah, I did fine, whatever. I'm like, what'd your math scores look like? And they were like, yeah, kind of weird too. Like, the geometry was lower. with like everybody that I talked to in my grade. And then I remember, so then I went to the student council, not the school council meeting. So I'm like this, one of the student representatives there as well. And we went over the math scores there, and then you could see like a noticeable gap in the math scores all across the board, specifically with my year as well. And I guess I don't know how you would be able to do this, but something that my parents were suggesting and my friends' parents as well was like, if students want, like, because there was obviously a big gap in instruction in geometry our freshman year because of like a variety of reasons that I'm sure like pretty much everyone here is aware of, like just Zoom school and like teachers being absent and whatnot. But if there are students that want to learn geometry for the SAT and they want to learn geometry to become successful, on their like on their MCAS and whatnot, because it's not only me, it's seniors this year as well. Would there be a way for the school to like, I guess, provide like some sort of extra help or some sort of resources for students that weren't able to learn geometry in their freshman or sophomore year, and even whatever? Like, if there was gap in their geometry instruction, would there be a way for students to kind of get like a quick update on it and like resources that the school could provide either after school and before school, or even just something that students could do independently? Because I know that that's definitely like an area where a lot of people are lacking, and it even shows in my pre-calc class this year, like just looking at, so we're doing trig functions right now, and a lot of that is based in geometry that we learned in freshman year. And our teacher had to like reteach us a lot of the geometry that we missed in our freshman year in order to be able to understand what we're doing in junior year. And this is not me speaking for all the students, but like I can definitely say that I think I've had a lot of trouble with the past couple units, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I didn't understand what we did in freshman year. So if I didn't understand like the base of it, it's gonna be really hard for me, and I'm sure other students as well, to understand the more advanced stuff.
Yeah.
So that was definitely like, I don't know, something that I thought of, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of other
Great
people are
idea.
thinking as well.
Well, that's great. And you've got all the right people here listening to you right now. And also on the right night when this is exactly what's going to be discussed
Mhm.
is, what's available and what can be done, but also taking extra input is wonderful.
Yeah,
So thank you.
yeah. So I don't know if you guys have any questions or.
I have a question for you, but it's a little bit less serious than the MCAS. I would like to know what you did for anything but a backpack day during Spirit Week.
Oh, you guys are gonna be so mad at me. Oh, I didn't do it.
You didn't bring a backpack.
No, you didn't do the day.
There was some really good ones. Mine was, I had a really late Sunday night before, and it was. Oh, you got me.
What was your favorite exhibition of
My-
anything but a backpack day?
My favorite exhibition, so there were some good ones, right? So there was one kid, he brought in a microwave, like literally like a microwave, and was like, he opened up the microwave and he put all his like books and stuff in it. He's walking around with a microwave, and there was another kid, you ever seen like little portable grills, like the ones, you feel like camping, you bring them? There was a guy he was with a portable grill, and he had all his books stacked in the grill, and then when he would sit down in class, put the grill down, and he would take the top off the grill. And he would put all his books in it. So I think those are probably my two favorites. There were some that was like there were kids bringing suitcases, and then they would drag the suitcases down the stairs, and you could like hear it from a mile away. Yeah, exactly. No, but I would say the microwave and the grill, pretty hard to top that.
That sounds hard to top. That sounds hard. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions for Diego that are perhaps?
Observations on Spirit Week? First one in a while.
Good. Like, honestly, like really good. I mean, I think like it was awesome. It was super fun. I think as a school, we should try to do more stuff where it's like everyone's together. I said that in the last meeting too, but I mean, I'll say it again, like
Yep.
the pep rally, I think that's a good thing to bring everybody together. And also like, I mean, I'm not a senior, but I think especially for the seniors, it's good too, because it's like, I mean, they didn't have like the most awesome high school experience, like the most normal one that
Yeah.
they could have had. So I think it's good for like their senior year to be able to do special stuff like that. Like, I think it's fun. Also, all the senior nights for the sports teams were
That was
really,
nice, yeah.
were really nice as well. I went to the football senior night, and then I went to the girls soccer senior night, and there was only one one senior. But it was still, I think it was still really nice to be able to make that, special for her. So it was pretty cool.
And playoffs this weekend?
Yes, football, Friday night, right? It's at home. I think they're like the 4th seed. I talked to my friend last night. So that'll be really fun. And especially like playoff home game, the first one, like I'm pretty excited for that. And I think all the students are as well.
Any other questions for Diego? Well, I will say thank you for your report. And the fun part is a lot of fun, but thank you also for bringing a really important, piece of your observation for you and your classmates, and also for coming with solutions, with
Yeah.
ideas, and for having explored it with school council as well. So that's really helpful all around. And we appreciate your input.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I have one more question as well. We were talking about it today, so there's one teacher absent in the math department, and right now, Mr. Brown's pre-calc classes have combined with mine. And like a lot of people are wondering what's gonna happen, like how things are gonna change once Mr. Wad gets back. Will the math classes go back to normal, or how is that gonna work? I don't know if you have anything right now that I can like tell my friends and the people in my class.
I think right now it's difficult to provide a public comment on what will happen. Ultimately, when Mr. Wadkowski comes back, he will take over his section of the classes, and Mr. Brown will go back to teaching what he was doing prior.
So the kids in my pre-calc class, they'll go back to the normal classes they were taking with Mr. Brown instead of being combined.
Mhm.
That's the plan.
That's
All right, cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Diego. A joy is ours. And you're welcome to stay or not, and you know where the candy is, so that's good. All right, chairman's report. So since we last met, I've served as chair to represent us in a couple different ways. I met with the Student Advisory Committee, which Diego also sits on. And just so you guys know, I actually didn't realize that this was a thing until in the last year it came up. Sarah mentioned going to lunch with students, and that was a thing that she did. And so the Student Advisory Committee is, it's actually listed in our policy manual in section JIB, if you're interested. But it's a state mandated committee that is made up of, is it 5 total representatives?
5 total with 1 elected to come speak with us.
So that's how we get Diego here, which is wonderful. And we meet occasionally, and I got to join them with Pam and also with Erin Fortunato, who serves as their faculty advisor, and Trish, and also got some feedback about how the year was going, some feedback on how priorities for students have either changed or remained the same since COVID. That was a great discussion. Some feedback on our last meeting, which was fun also, and to get outside input from a student perspective. So that was a really great experience, and I'm looking forward to the next one as well. I also represented us in Essex at the quarterly department heads meeting. I don't, to my knowledge, know that Manchester has an equivalent of this, but this is just a quarterly meeting where like I said, the heads of each department just do a brief report out for the Board of Selectmen. It's an open public meeting. So I gave an update on where we've been since the end of July. And some context on the work that we're doing right now based on the community feedback that we've had particular to Essex. Also met with an Essex resident who serves on the Essex Strategic Planning Committee, who had some questions about the work that we are doing and wanted to meet and discuss that. So I joined her. We've replied to one committee-wide email from a Manchester resident who also joined us for a public comment, so that was easy. And then also I put some time, as you all know, to following up from our last meeting on the process for approving warrants and what that means and what it doesn't. Sent out a comprehensive email about that. So given that email that came from reviewing all the available resources, meeting with Dorothy Presser, who is our MASC field representative, I created that explanatory document and sent it as an email. Beyond that, any further questions, concerns, understanding, we'll have to work out with MASC potentially doing a small, learning lunch or something for us. But right now they have their hands full with the conference that's coming up. But also the charting the course state training for school committee members is being offered on December 4th. And so that can be addressed there as well. That is what I have done since the last time we met. And as we started 2 meetings ago, but I forgot last time, I would like us to review the next 2 operating protocols to make up for last week. So I've invited Jake and Kate to read for us. Could you just read the one next to your name? We don't have to comment, just for processing and pondering.
Work together to establish a vision, create policy, approve a budget, and assure accountability to sustain continuous improvement in teaching, learning, and facilities.
Thank you.
Clearly define success and accountability for the committee, superintendent, faculty, staff, and students.
Thank you. We will continue on with that in the next meeting. Okay, that concludes the chairman's report. Moving on to the consent agenda. Welcome, Anna. Except we don't have any minutes tonight for
No,
review, right?
I own that was my fault. We got stuck in a loop of executive session minutes and
Mhm.
minutes. So we got it cleared up and then we'll be in the packet next time. So
That's all right. Thank you.
it was not Maria's fault. It was all on me.
Got it. So with that, tonight, the consent agenda really just includes the acceptance of warrants. It includes the warrants for vouchers V1017, V1018, V1019, and the payroll warrants for September 1st, September 15th, and September 29th. Have I done that correctly?
Yeah,
Did we
and,
miss anything?
yeah, we haven't voted the payroll warrants. They're provided as an informational basis.
Got it. Okay.
But I did get some questions that I offered to answer in the meeting too at the appropriate time on some of the vouchers, so I'm happy to do that.
Okay, so why don't we entertain a motion first? Is there a motion on the table?
Motion to approve the warrants.
Okay, is there a second?
Second read.
Okay, discussion. So we had some questions.
Yeah, do you want school committee members to discuss before I answer the questions, or do you want me to get right into it?
It'd be nice if you would get right into it and then we could.
That's okay. Great.
Go
Okay.
ahead, please.
Do you want me to, you're gonna ask the questions you had forwarded to me already, or did you want to say something different?
No, you go first.
Okay, great. So I had questions from a couple members and let me run through them. The first one related to a question about the budget to actual that I'm gonna probably wait till we get to that part. And so let me move more to, this one was also budget to actual. We had a question about the per diem trainer and those costs, and I know Tricia's here, so she can correct me if I go off the rails a little bit, but I did talk with our athletic director a little bit. The question was just about how it's expensive, which it is, and we certainly know that, and it's really just a function of the fact. I think there are a lot of positions that we're seeing in the current marketplace, especially hourly, daily subs, transportation, food service, all those types of costs where just the labor market is very tough, and this is certainly one of those areas. And so it is true that per diem costs are high. We have a contract that the athletic director has secured with an organization that finds highly qualified trainers for many other districts. They're working on our case, and I think they're actively recruiting. They're optimistic we can find somebody. And in the past, it was an in-house position. The cost of the contract is pretty similar when you factor in the fact that there's no benefits associated with it. And typically, from what she was telling me, you'll have more costs in the fall and in the spring, less so in the winter, just based on the sports. So the trajectory that we're seeing right now may not be continuous through the year, but hoping that as we get somebody who's contracted for the year, which is kind of the fingers crossed, the option that we'll have, that would be better situation. Do you want to add more to
I
that?
think one of the reasons why we're in the situation where we're going per diem is that our athletic trainer resigned mid-August, and we didn't have the opportunity we were late in the search options, and we had 0 candidates. And then we went into Mass General's pool. They had all been assigned. So we were kind of behind the 8 ball on that one.
So let's let him go through the ones that he's already received and then we'll, yeah. Oh, is it following up from that?
Yeah.
Got it. Go ahead.
So is it your expectation that we're actually not going to be able to fill the position because of where we are in the year and we're going to need to do per diem for this year?
We're hoping that Mass General might be able to secure us with a athletic trainer that would be assigned to us for the entire year. At this point, they have not been able to identify one, and we still have no applicants. So for this point forward, until we are assigned one, we will be at a per diem.
Can we keep that per diem on a more, I'm thinking not only in terms of the cost, but in terms of the service that they're able to provide to the students that they're.
Yeah, so the athletic director has actually projected out what we need and finding those people. She's tried to like get some of the same people back and kind of schedule them in. Right now, we're going into state tournament time, and we hear at different times when we're playing and what we will need. So it's very difficult for her, although she tried to project it out. It's not always aligning, and we hear like from day to day when we're playing. So it isn't easy for her to schedule, but she is more than on top of it and amazing just in terms of
Quick
scheduling.
clarification for folks who may not be totally on top of it. We're assigned from a pool and we can't always guarantee the same person.
No, she is going company to company, just finding people. She's calling EMTs, she's calling everywhere. We don't have a pool.
Okay.
So what she has done is
Great.
actually pretty amazing that we've been covered. And now, you know, the MIA has changed rules for football. So if you are traveling for football, we didn't used to need to send a trainer, but we do need to send a trainer to away games. So if you have a home game in soccer in the afternoon, you need 2 trainers. It's really become a pretty significant issue for us. But Kimmy Molinari has done a wonderful job at doing what she can with the resources we have available.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you.
Great. So moving along, thanks, Tricia. There was a question about uniforms and socks and the cost of those. And that's another thing I spoke with the athletic director, who also agrees that it's very expensive and it's a cost that they're looking at actively. She's done a great job with budget. It is in the published uniform guidelines. So at this point, we're providing what's in the guidelines. Whether those guidelines stay the same forever or not, I think is really a better question for Trish than for me, but I know it's something that they're looking at because I think there's agreement that we want it to be reasonable expenditure. And you know, there's different options that might be considered, and not every sport has socks. You know, some have just tops and hat or something, things like that. They're not all the same, but it's all based on what's in the guidelines. So that would need to change before we change what we do. And then the last thing was on storage containers, and those have been dramatically brought back. We had, I think, 4 during the COVID phase where we had to move stuff out of the classrooms. Those are down to 1 now. And then there were 2 previously that are still there. And basically the summer, I just said, Jason, please get rid of as many of these as possible. And he's been whittling it down and down. And so I think the one that's left from the COVID phase is also going to be gone pretty soon. So we're in agreement there about the desire to get rid of that. So that's one set of questions. Just moving through some of the other ones that are not related. So one question was whether the vouchers are tied to the budget actual report. They're not. The year-to-date cost is everything that was posted through the end of last month and through the vouchers last month. So all items on these vouchers are not in the year-to-date actual, but anything that's on a purchase order is automatically in the forecast. And anything not on a purchase order that is something that is likely to occur has been included in our forecast, which is based off of our prior experience. So a lot of it is baked into the forecast, if not the year-to-date actual. So that's that. And then we just had some some questions that really more about the cost categories that might be better to tie to the budget to actual report.
If you can explain, that would be great.
Okay, no problem. So one of them was related to our annual license for our ledger software, Tyler Technologies. We pay $12,000 a year, and that is a recurring cost, and it is factored into the forecast. It's under the district administrative expenditures, And if you look at the comments that we had in the budget to actual report, it talked about the need for a transfer into the district admin that were all primarily district administrative technology related. And so just the main distinction I think to be aware of is there's instructional technology, which is generally classroom and student oriented, and then there's administrative technology, which is back end oriented, like ledger software, some of the systems for Aspen would be an example of that, where it's not providing instructional, materials to students, et cetera, and all the things we use to run our payroll software, et cetera. Those are all administrative. And the other question was about back to school ordering supplies. Typically, they're out of building instructional expenditures in the operating area. And the last one was about the snow cap warranties contracts, it's a service contract really for our servers. And that's like Tyler Technology coming out of district administrative. And one thing, I think this is a great question. It made me realize that in our expenditure reporting in the past, we've just explained what the accounts are. I think one thing, it's been many years since we've gotten feedback about how to update that reporting. One thing we could very easily do is include in that file what the roll-up categories are. So your Excel document could say exactly which summary category it reports to. I think that would answer that question and be able to provide you with the information as you're looking at it. How does it relate to the summary category? So I think that might be something that we can do on our end so that when you look at the vouchers, you know what category it's for. Maybe that would help. I think those are all the questions, but if I'm missing any, please let me know.
Anyone else have questions about the vouchers presented that aren't related to the budget to actual report? Because I was going to explain those. Yes, Anna.
So thank you for clarifying that. That's really helpful. Before I go into the question, can I also ask a few questions about when we are approving the vouchers? I think that Teresa, you mentioned in the email that it has to, because everything that you guys are doing, so you already verify that it's within the budget. What you mean is within the budget category line, right?
So the certification that we provide is first, that things are quoted properly, and that's on the voucher certification, and also that everything is within the budget.
Yeah.
And when we looked at, there are actually some, the policy, we'll talk about policy updates, but one of the typical school committee policies that's recommended is to make sure that we attest to the fact that items are within the budget on a total basis. On a line by line basis, that's where the school committee transfers come in. So when our past practice, which we've talked about, is when we know ahead of time that there's an area that's going to have a concern, our job is to let school committee know right away. So we have multiple budget updates throughout the year. We had one in August where we said, here are a couple of areas that we know are going to be. Then when we have our periodic budget to actual updates, we not only provide more detail on that, but also a request for transfers so that the school committee can realign the budget based on the forecast, which is what we'll be doing tonight, what we typically do at the end of the year. And we've talked about actually adding one midwinter this year. So
We are approving the transfer of the budget today because on the regular basis, when you guys are spending, when we're approving the warrants of the vouchers is within the budget category, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
So when we're approving the voucher, again, are we approving that when you said that it's within the budget, which you also starting to include in the narratives? Do you mean that within the budget with the budget lines?
Yes, so the first thing is that the voucher approval is really approval to release cash,
Yep.
which is separate from a budgetary approval process where the school committee oversees the line by line accounts. So the typical voucher process is you want to know, and we certify that all spending is within budget, but not necessarily on an account by account basis. That's less for the release of cash process, but more for the budget to actual process, where we need to get your statutory approval to realign the budget categories, which we do at intervening periods throughout the year. So they're really separate and distinct, but for many years now, my voucher notes will include commentary about areas that I think are of concern that I want you to know about, so you can monitor the budget. They have not typically included a budget to actual update, but they will say, this is an area, let's say snow. Right now, we're up to spending, $40,000. Our total expectation is somewhere between 50 and 85. Here's how we're tracking. That's an example. Or here's some of the costs. You'll notice that there's a lot for, let's say, special ed transport. You may remember, I've told you about this category. We're expecting it to be maybe $20,000 to $30,000 over budget. Right now, we're tracking. So I will provide color commentary, but not a budget to actual report, because that's really more of a data exercise that will happen 2 or 3 times throughout the year at this point.
So just so that people know, like last time, especially yesterday, and I know we're gonna go through a little bit more detail, is like you said, this is approving based on a cash basis.
Yeah.
So I have asked to include the cash balance so that we know if this is, we're approving based on cash releases, we need to know the cash balance, what we are on the different accounts.
Yep.
So we'll get to that in the
Yes.
subcommittee update.
So,
Mhm.
yes, we'll get more into detail updates. Now, my question is, if this is all within the budget, as you stated somewhere here. For example, the $12,400 to Tyler Technology
Yep.
is part of the district admin expense. And your comment is this item is within budget.
For that specific line item. Yep, that's right.
That's right. So then why are we later today, you're proposing to move $80,000 additional into that line? If
Yep.
this is already within budget and this is not including in what you're proposing?
Yeah, that can it'll be a very quick answer. So first, it is within budget. It's in line with prior years. That's what I was letting you know. And we budget for that estimate based on what we think the annual license renewal growth will be. 2, that specific item rolls up into a broader category, which is the category you're referencing. So if you look at the budget to actual report, what it'll show you is why there's an overage and what some of those areas are. And then in the notes, it talks about the fact that we've been investing in servers and in storage, as well as some of the costs that were budgeted to be in personnel for the IT support position that were used through an outsourced contract for the first, couple months of the year. Now that's wound down. So there's an initial absorption of that cost in the operating expenses, with savings coming from up above in the salary. So those are all reasons that are unrelated to that particular line budget item, but they all roll up into a master category.
Okay, and the master category is gonna go over budget. That's what we're requesting for transfer.
That's exactly right.
All right.
And there's more I can say about that master category, but I know we might want to move on. I mean, investments in technology is definitely a big part of our budgetary story. The amount of overage is smaller compared to some of the other areas, but it is an area we've been highlighting for some time, both on the instructional side and on the administrative side. It's a big part of what we need to be doing to stay current.
So can I ask a big picture question for clarification? I've always viewed your notes more as a budget narrative, calling attention to things that maybe we anticipate a question about, or maybe a little bit abnormal or new. Not an intention to provide an accounting of what's happening. Is that fair? I mean, I think it's intended for the layperson to just understand what they're looking at in a big picture, or am I
So
misunderstanding?
that's exactly right. The vouchers are expenditures of funds, which we cannot do by statute without your approval. They're not necessarily, and really not designed to be a budget update. However, you can do 2 at once, which we try to do by providing color commentary and by certifying in all cases that we're within the budget overall, we're not going over, and letting you know areas that we want you to be aware of so that when we do get to the time for the budget to actual, you won't be surprised about which categories we're transferring into. So for example, when we see that that classroom teacher line had some overages, hopefully everyone will know exactly why, because we talked about it in August. So the goal is to give you advance information so that little bit at a time. So when you get to the detailed report, there aren't any surprises. We don't want you to be surprised.
But the voucher approval itself is authorization to release the cash based on the fact that you are certifying that those goods and services have been received.
Correct.
And the budget narrative is an additional
Yes,
appreciated kill 2 birds with
that's
one stone.
exactly right.
Thank you.
Another question.
Okay.
The 4.7K, the technology reseller that you made a comment is currently running above the budget. But if you
Which-
cannot,
Which one is this? Just tell me.
the Cumulus Global?
Cumulus
Cumulus
Global.
That you said that you cannot, everything that you're doing, it has to be within the budget. But why do you make a comment that right now is running above the budget if we haven't approved the transfer yet?
So Cumulus Global is the provider of Google Classroom. That's the platform on which all of our grades 3 through 12 use for their instructional management with the classroom teachers. All the curriculum is delivered there. It's something we've done every year. However, it's part of a larger category, which is instructional technology, which is going to be over budget based on continuing things that we've done through the COVID phase. In the COVID phase, we did have a lot of costs that came on through COVID funds that we talked about. One of the biggest areas we spent our COVID resources on was instructional technology, as we had to move from providing grade-based programs to a one-to-one basis, also remote learning. So there was a significant investment that happened there. As the COVID funds went away, those items start to be absorbed in the budget, which is a budgetary narrative that we provided for about 2 years now, saying that we know that instructional technology will grow as we absorb some of those costs. In terms of whether we spend the money now versus before, it is true that there are times where we will spend to keep the operations running, just like with payroll, for example, and then we will follow up with school committee authorization afterwards. So based on the fact that we have enough money in the budget, but we can't get line item transfers, every day when we're approving purchase orders. So at certain periods through the year, we will ask for those approvals to happen. Typically, this is a good time to do it for all the reasons that we've discussed.
I don't know if you answered the question.
Mm.
Why are we saying that it's running above the budget if we are approving that everything that you're doing is within the budget, like you said?
I don't think, no, the budget transfers are telling you areas that are not within the budget that are
Oh, we
over.
haven't approved the budget transfer.
That's
yet.
correct. That's
So
why
why
I'm
are we
bringing it to you.
approving the voucher that you are saying that is above the budget?
Because so first of all, you don't have to. You could say that you don't want to. But what we have done and what most school committees do, most municipal organizations will allow operations to continue running, provided that areas that will be over budget have funding available to support areas that are under budget. Sorry, or vice versa. Areas that are under budget can support areas that are over. We could alternatively cease just keeping things running, not paying people, not buying licenses, shutting down Google Classroom to say, well, we have to wait till we have a school committee meeting to pay for that transfer. But in the past, that hasn't been necessary because we provide updates to the school committee saying, we're running on target. And you can see from the bottom line, we're going to end this year at this point, we intend fully to end in the black. So I think what you might be asking is whether you want us to continue with operations prior to having a school committee vote on a transfer, which is a valid question you could ask.
And that would be a discussion that we would want to start at the subcommittee level. Because I want to answer all of our questions, but also this is literally what our subcommittee meetings are for. So that is
The only
something
other
we can
thing I would
discuss.
add to it is that it's very common practice for us to have a budget transfer at the end of the year as well, where all lines get adjudicated and evened out. So that's a process that's commonly used in a lot of places and we've used for decades. But implicit in that is the fact that some of this right sizing of the lines will happen after the fact.
Kate had her hand up.
I would like to move the vote.
All in favor of moving the vote? Okay. So moved. That's 5. Okay, the motion was to approve the warrants as previously presented. All in favor? That's 5. All opposed? That's 1. No abstentions. Motion carries.
Okay, and I'm
Thank
happy to spend more time out of this session to help answer any questions and make sure people have the information they need to make the decisions.
Very much appreciated. Please, Pam, go ahead.
Can I ask the chair if she would consider reorganizing the agenda?
Yes. Yes. Where would we like to go next? Would we like to?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're about a half an hour over.
We
where I
are
predicted
definitely
they
about
would
a
be.
half an hour over. Yeah. So,
Sorry.
no, that's not you. We can take these. We need to do some of this, right? Some of this here, but also a lot of this we need to do at our subcommittee meeting so we can move forward. So do we want to, is there anything critical in our subcommittee reports that we couldn't bypass at the moment? Can we do that?
If you'll take the suggestion, I would just move up the annual assessment report.
Yep.
Then maybe take subcommittees in reverse order and end with finance and budget together in case it
Yep.
takes more time than
Great.
anticipated.
Great. Do we need a motion to reorganize the agenda or no?
It's your authority.
Then I say yes, please. Let us move on to the annual student assessment report. Thank you all for joining us here, everyone. Who's that?
Okay, I'll do a quick I don't know if the entire committee has had the good fortune to meet everyone on the team. I know the principals were all here for school improvement plans. You may have seen Angela remotely, and Allison was with us remotely for the YRBS. So we've got the whole team here tonight.
Do you want to hold in right over here?
And just to let you know, you've got quite a bit of data in a in a rough draft format. We organized in slides. What we intend to present tonight is I'm never good at doing two things at once here. Our game plan tonight is to present an executive summary by starting wide, narrowing, and then broadening again at the end. So it'll start with Angela providing observations from the district perspective, and then we'll tackle each one of the school level perspectives. Allison's here to respond to any questions you might have about special ed. I would just preface this by saying this is, and you'll probably hear this repeated, this is one piece of information. We're looking at our MCAS assessments. We're also looking at our iReady assessments. We're looking at those two things together to see where there might be local support of or negation of things that we're seeing in MCAS. And I think this year we're attending to it with a little bit more care and attention than we have in the past, because we have been through the pandemic and things have been offset and disturbed. And we're looking at this and have been encouraged to do so kind of as the new baseline. So if you just indulge us, we'll take you through as quickly as we can and then answer plenty of questions at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela to kick it off.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for having us. And Diego, I really want to thank you for setting the stage, because I love the fact that you're talking with your friends, that you talked with the student council about possible solutions, because this really is, I think you're going to see in this presentation tonight that really what we're talking about is where are we in the state of recovery from the pandemic, because it's impacted every student on multiple levels. And so we're going to look at some of those gaps, and we're going to talk about what we might be able to do to help close them. All right, but first we thought we would show you, what the demographics of our student population are. So let me give you, thank you, Pam. Give you a second to take a look at this. Well, the district remains predominantly homogeneous, both racially and ethnically. The student population is diversifying. And so we thought that was important for you to be able to see. We have close to 30% of our students that are classified in a high need category. And as you can see, that encompasses several other classifications of students.
Angela, why does DESE classify these subgroups and draw attention to them?
I think they're looking to see if we are providing equitable opportunities for education for all of our students. Another thing that we thought was going to be important for you to see was to look at the impact of absenteeism particularly last year. We're looking at last year, and as you know, we were still dealing with COVID, and we had students, staff who were absent, might be absent because there were family members that were also ill. So absenteeism was still playing a big role. We had an average, as you can see there by the statistics, we had a lot of students who missed 10 or more days. Chronic absenteeism is not considered it's not, absenteeism is not considered chronic until a student has missed 10% of their school time. So that would be about 18 days. But we did have, quite a large percentage that, that missed more than 10 or 10% of their time, and a smaller percentage that missed as much as 20% of their time. So it is still, it had a big influence. And it's also important for us to look at the testing landscape because it's changed quite a bit over the last several years. So I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit of a historical perspective, if I may, because not only was the test interrupted, but the test changed throughout this process too. So Next Generation MCAS was first given in 2017. And it was given in grades 3 through 8 in English Language Arts and Math. This was an updated version of the 20-year-old MCAS test. So that had been the test that had been used for the past 20 years. But it did focus on students' critical thinking abilities, their application of knowledge, and the ability to make connections between reading and writing. It was designed to give clearer signals of readiness for the next grade level or for college and career readiness. And it moved from a paper and pencil test to a digital test. It was the first MCAS test that were given on the computer. That rollout was interrupted by the pandemic too, because the last aspect of the Next Generation test to be rolled out was the science, technology, and engineering component. It rolled out for grades 3 through 8 in 2019 and did not roll out for grades 10 until this past year in 2022. So it was the first time that 10th grade students took the new exam.
So this should be 3 to 8, just to.
Oh, 3
That's
to 8. My error. Thank you, Pam. So as you can see here, the last full test was given in 2019. There was no test in 2020. And then to integrate the test back into the schools, only a half test. So the tests for the majority of students included half of the questions, about half of the number of questions, with the exception of high school in 2021, because it was still a graduation requirement. And then the full test was administered again in 2022. So that had an impact on accountability too. Over the years, I'm sure you've heard presentations around accountability data and accountability status for districts. But what was released this year after 2022 was the accountability indicators. So that's where you get your attendance indicators, your student group percentiles, the various groups that we showed you. But there were no district determinations made based on this data. And one of the reasons is exactly what Pam said. The Department of Ed is really asking us to look at this data as a new baseline, that, there really isn't a way to compare. We're going to go back and we are going to look at 2019 to 2022, but we're really starting with a new baseline. So let's try to frame this with that perspective. The assessments that you're going to hear the principals talk about tonight are MCAS. And just to help you, for those of you that may not understand what each of these assessments are used for, MCAS measures student achievement progress against the state learning standards, as well as identifies gaps in the alignment of curriculum and instruction against those standards. So that's one perspective that we're going to get. This year, we have implemented iReady as the district's universal screener for math and reading in grades kindergarten through 8. And this screener helps us identify the strengths student strengths and areas that we may need, where students may need academic support, as well as it provides supplemental learning experiences that are aligned to individual students' skill sets. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You'll hear more about that from the principals. And then also you're going to hear about advanced placement, assessment at the high school. And most of you know that the advanced placement provides opportunities for students to experience college coursework while they're in high school. This test is administered at the end of an AP course. So that's kind of important to know. MCAS is administered in the spring, and iReady is given 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and again at the end of the year. We also wanted you to understand what the data analysis process is. And as you can see, there are common practices across the district when analyzing data. And there are multiple groups of teachers, administrators, specific teams that are involved in reviewing the data. Different levels look at the data with a different lens. So for example, at a district level, you're looking for trends across a district. At a school level, you may be looking at curriculum and instruction and looking for gaps that you're seeing across the school in any of those areas. And of course, at the teacher level, you're looking at individual student data and getting more granular about how each student did.
Slide.
Next slide. Okay, so here are some district observations. Give you a second to take a peek at those. But as you do, I do want you to keep in mind that we're starting with a new baseline. I think it's also important to understand that there were many variables that impacted assessment results as we look from 2019 pre-pandemic to last spring. Districts looking at the 2 data sets really to help us inform where we go from here, where the gaps are, where we see we've lost, and what we're going to need to do. I think it's important to note that after your questions, your first rounds of questions came in the appendix under the district data, I did highlight the cohort data. That means following a group of students through the years to see how they did during this time. And you'll see how that illustrated, it had a significant impact on those cohorts. We go straight back there. But also we did have some, good news too, around the gains that students classified in high needs category made during this time period too. Pam. And then this is just to give you a snapshot. This group is our current 9th graders. So this is giving you, this is 5 years worth of testing data. It's really a 6-year period that you're looking at, but with the reminder that there was no test in 2020. So the pandemic's had a significant impact, as we heard Diego speak to. We're going to move into each of the buildings. Each of the principals are going to talk to you a little more specifically about the data at their buildings. And Trish, I believe you're next. We're going to start with the high school. We're going to.
Great. So we're gonna start, I'm gonna, go ahead.
Trish, do we have this, the report we're looking at?
You should, it was part of what was provided.
Yep, you had the draft, there's a few.
The only reason I'm asking is, I'm My eyesight's awful and I'd have an easier time, and mine doesn't look like this.
That wasn't changed from what I submitted, so I'm not sure.
The beginning, a couple of beginning slides were changed, but other,
Okay, so
but
now
it should,
it'll be the same.
should track
I
on.
have it,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
This should track on.
No, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, I have this slide, thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to start with our MCAS data and speak to ELA. So I think understanding the test is important. At the high school level, the ELA exam or the ELA MCAS test includes 30 questions, which also within that 30 includes a literary analysis essay and an argumentative essay, which students take two sources and write an argumentative essay based on their opinion of the sources. Overall, in ELA, our results were pretty good. 87% of students scored meeting to exceeding, with 71% of our high needs students scoring meeting to exceeding. Essay writing showed as a strength, and what we saw was 72% of all points were earned. 89% of students scored a 4 or more, and 64% scored a 6 or more. The total you could get in essay writing between the two essays was 8 per each. In language, we scored an average of 90% correct. One of the topics was determine the meaning of an unknown word-based context in context. And in the prior year, that was shown as a weakness, and we saw that rise as a strength this year. In reading, we had an average score of 91% correct. So in terms of ELA, our students did fairly well. However, we do have plans for progress to improve that program even to a greater extent. We feel as though we need to continue our writing. Kind of promoting stamina in writing is something that we see as a high need as students come into the high school. And we do that through our journaling program, where students journal every other week. They write you start at 250 words as a freshman, and then you kind of move up from there. Diego can tell you all about that. And then on the kind of weeks, though, what I think is great is that kids need to read other students' journals and write with some substance about what they see about that writing. So either commenting on grammar or commenting on content. And that helps them just think about writing. We also will continue our emphasis on literary analysis. Our students take part in a lot of graded discussions in writing on literary analysis. But that goes, I think one of my big things with the ELA is that it's not just the English teachers, it's other teachers. It's writing across disciplines, it's review of documents across the disciplines, it's writing arguments across the disciplines. We have been using No Reading to help promote on-demand grammar assistance for students. It also allows students to use guided prompts for compositions, where it will correct students in real time and provide data to teachers about areas in grammar and language where students are struggling, so they can target that in their instruction. And we also continue to reflect on the vision of the graduate in terms of communication skills, collaboration, and really identifying appropriate sources in terms of developing those skills and dispositions necessary for postgraduate work. Can we go, now high school, Diego's already given my presentation. So thank you. So we look at the high school math. There's a story to tell here, definitely. It's not a great story. So this test has 42 questions. There are 3 main aspects. MCAS, which is algebra, geometry, and statistics and probability. I was here doing our school improvement plan. You might remember me saying, well, we didn't in 2021, we didn't teach statistics and probability. We're going to move that to algebra 2. In 2022, what we see is that our students are overall in that area were standards that were addressed in the algebra class during that. I think the other we need to look at is we had 75% meeting or exceeding with 43% of our high needs students at meeting or exceeding. Our weakest area was most definitely geometry. I should explain some pathways in the high school. So when you come into the high school, you in ninth grade, you could be in either honors geometry or in honors or college algebra. And then in sophomore year, if you were in honors geometry, you're going to be moving to algebra 2. If you were in algebra 1, you're going to be moving to geometry. So what I think is important to note is that we did have instructional and staffing gaps during freshman year honors geometry and also during sophomore year college prep geometry. That was very disruptive to student learning, and that's something we need to own. It's not something that we're not going to say didn't happen. It did happen, and it is reflected in our scores. In algebra, we scored 75%. One thing we did note as a positive is that our students did do well on when I was a teacher, we called HOTS, higher order thinking skills, which means that students were able to respond to questions that required them to interpret, evaluate, or develop conclusions well. So when we think about our plans for progress in the high school, one focus is on our high needs kids, and we addressed that this school year. We hired a middle school special education teacher who is also certified in mathematics to come to the high school and is looping, meaning they're teaching our ninth grade algebra college prep kids, and next year the same teacher will teach the geometry college prep kids. Consistency and instruction is going to support the students, and also having a special ed teacher who differentiation comes kind of as an automatic, really is supporting those students' growth. We've looked to find some consistency in our instruction structures in the high school. We have, as Diego was talking about what's going to happen, we're overstaffed in the high school currently in math. And I'm thankful that we were able to do that to assure that we had consistent instruction in mathematics. Last year in our highest needs population, which was our grade 10 college prep students preparing for the MCAS exam, we did not have a highly qualified math teacher from November until the end of the school year. Although we do celebrate the special education teachers that stepped in to support those students, those teachers are not highly qualified math teachers, but they did do a fantastic job in supporting them, and all of them have met the criteria of competency determination for graduation, which is a credit to them. We also are going to continue to assure that our standards are aligned and to make sure that we're finding more relevance in the application of math. When we find that there's more relevance in application and meaning to learning, students internalize it more deeply, and thus we have better outcomes on a variety of assessments. And then in science, again, this was the new exam that was based on the 2016 standards and was delayed for the high school. There are 4 aspects to this test: evolution, hereditary, molecules, organisms, and ecology. We did 81% correct on ecology, 77 on evolution, and we struggled with heredity at 60% average correct, and molecules to organisms at 68%. Our plans for our science and technology will be, again, to support that co-teaching model for our high needs students. Again, our high needs students didn't score as high as we would have liked to have seen them score. We are going to review our standards, particularly around hereditary and molecules to organisms and how we're doing instruction there. We're going to continue to support students' technical writing, which actually was seen as a strength. The open response questions were strong in the STE. And again, we're going to continue to look at tying these standards to the vision of the graduate and real world application. In terms of our AP program, one thing I would say, I want to go for for STEM, if you're comparing scores with other high schools, you need to look at what they were teaching and what they were testing on. There's different tests that schools can choose in grade 9 for STE. So you could take biology in grade 9 MCAS test. You could take biology in grade 10. You could take intro to physics in grade 9, or you could do a combination of all of those. So when you're comparing those scores, it's not apples to apples. In the AP program, we have 20 distinct AP courses, which is, I would say, actually kind of high for a school of our size. We had a 78% score of 3 or above on 2022 data. We have a statistical outlier that, again, that's one of those situations where we can't ignore our deficiencies, and that was with AP CompGov. That data, having more than half of the students score a 1, really damages those scores. I was the proctor of that exam on purpose, and I can speak to the issues with the exam in a separate time, but we'll leave it there. So if we take that statistical outlier out, we would be at 85%, 3 or above. 67% of the class of 2022 or 2023 combined took at least 1 test. Again, when we look at comparing our AP scores to other schools, I did kind of a deep dive on this. You need to consider if students were required to take the test or not. We require our students to take the test. If they don't take the test, then they get honors credit. I included a participation rate in my chart that was based on all 4 years of the full enrollment, because that was the only way to keep it apples to apples. And you'll see that we're on the higher end of that, where you'll see a school, I think it was Lexington, had a 94, 3 or above, but they had 17% participation rate, where many more students were in the AP program. You need to consider prerequisites, and you need to consider time dedicated to the courses. Our AP courses are embedded in our typical schedule. If you look at some of the programs of studies for some of these other schools, you'll see double labs. You'll see extra time devoted to AP program. So the AP program, we are going to do a deep dive review. Diego's on our school council. That's our parents, students, and teachers that work together. We are surveying all Massachusetts schools about their policies and about their opinions on the AP program. We started developing that survey last week. I'm going to do one more round with the school council before I send it out to all schools. We've been talking to schools and universities about who accepts credits, and we do have, the College Board does provide kind of a search on that we're going to provide more information to families at the time of course selection, based on whether they want to be taking the AP. We've been talking to college reps about the impact on merit award for students if they enroll in the AP program. We're looking at the impact on rankings, and we're also will in the spring be surveying students and parents about their beliefs on the AP program. And we're going to kind of look holistically at all of that information. I think I probably said enough. So I'm going to pass it off to the middle school, and I'll answer questions at the end.
So if we were in a classroom, this would be the time we'd take a cognitive break. Because there's a lot of information, a lot of numbers coming at you. So take a deep breath, think of your pet or someone you love, maybe have some candy, have a sip of your drink, and just give your brain a little break from all the numbers and stats. And then I'll dive in.
truly a middle school fashion.
And before I dive into the slides, I wanted to just give a little bit of overview and background, but the overarching thematic umbrella that I want you to think about as I'm presenting is that I am concerned by the data. My team is concerned by the data. We are meeting, we are brainstorming, we are looking at what our options are. We are considering where, what factors are contributing to this. So just to let you know, that is the energy that we are coming at this with. But before heading into that, I just want to put some things into a little bit of a perspective in terms of the lens of things. There's a few contributing factors for some of the numbers that we're seeing. I know that 8th grade was mentioned specifically in someone's notes about being a concern, and that is, it's a multifold concern and issue. We did have staffing issues. We've had staffing issues in English for a very long time. We've had trouble keeping consistent English teachers at the 6th grade level, at the 8th grade level. And a teacher that was out on leave for quite a while that we expected to return for this school year or prior school year, we heard from that teacher in the summer that they were not planning to return to this school, but going to another school. So the pool was very slim in terms of finding a highly qualified English teacher at that time of the year. We did end up bringing a long-term sub in the year who's an excellent teacher, but this sub had never taught 8th grade English before, so it was a first year. We also had a maternity leave in 8th grade math, and there were no candidates at all. And I eventually dug into an old sub pool and contacted a retired, highly qualified special education teacher who was working another job. But we worked something out so that she could come in for part of every school day. And then the other part of the school day had to be patchworked based on the plans that the teacher who was on leave left and the plans that the new sub created, because plans are on paper, but they change once you implement them in the reality of what the kids can do. So it was a very, very challenging year for staffing. A bit of an anomaly to have both English and math classrooms at the 8th grade level impacted in that way. But just to give you a little bit of insight into other possible implications to the data. Another thing that I wanted to bring to mind regarding absences, as you know, I came in the summer with proposed language to our tardy policy because we had excessive students late to school. We also have had a lot of absences. On the days that MCAS testing were being administered, we had an average of 12 to 14 students absent on those days. And I say days because we had 2 sessions of English, 2 sessions of math, 1 session of science. So these students had to take the test in a makeup session. And I proctored those makeup sessions. And I noticed as I was proctoring them that students were working pretty quickly. And I had heard anecdotally from teachers in the classroom that students seemed to be working very quickly, particularly in 8th grade. So I decided to collect a little data around the students that took those makeup tests. And what I found was that for English, a test that should take 2 to 2.5 hours, the average completion time was 42 minutes. For math, which is a test that should take 1.5 hours, the average completion time was 48 minutes. And for science, a test that should take 1.5 hours, the average completion time was 32 minutes. So just other things that factor into what we're seeing there graphically. So our kids, they have testing fatigue. And I don't blame them after a pandemic coming in. We piloted iReady last year. So all students took iReady. All students took the English MCAS. All students took the math MCAS. And then our 8th graders also had the science MCAS. And we took the NAEP exam, which is the nation's report card. So a subset, about 40 of our 8th graders also took either a math or a reading test for NAEP. So they're tired, they're fatigued, and I would say not bringing their best selves to the testing experiences. We're also seeing some resistance this year to iReady. Our middle child, they love to push back. iReady is recommending 40 to 45 minutes of independent practice through My Learning Path. And as you know, I've restructured me blocks in order to pull in at least 20 minutes per week in each subject. I think 5 of you have middle schoolers, so you may have been hearing at home some annoyance with the restructure of me block and missing that time. So we dug into that data a little bit to see what it's telling us about how they are spending their time. And in math, 78% of them have spent 10 to 29 minutes a week, and the rest not even 10 minutes. So they're doing some things on their computers. Our teachers are up and about a little bit more observing. In reading, only 24% are actually spending 30 to 49 minutes. So that's some data that we need to look at in terms of that strategy using MeBlock. I think it's too soon to make a big change. We need to have the next diagnostic assessment, which is in January. But they're pushing back, and that's what they do, and that's why I love them. Because they, they're finding themselves. And then my team would not be happy if I didn't also point out the fact that, we're here to look at standardized test data, MCAS, iReady, math, English, science. But I want to just remind everybody the narrow scope of those assessments, and to remember that if we have the student at the center and we're looking at the whole child, we also want to think about artistic skills and athletic skills and musical skills and the helping skills they learn through classes like health. And to just remember that COVID had an impact on our students' basic reasoning skills, their self-esteem, their emotional management skills, and also their social norms. The middle child goes through more changes between the ages of 11 and 14 than about the same amount of physical and chemical changes as they did in birth to 3. So there's a lot happening with our kids, and they were 9 to 11 years old when they were home during the pandemic. And we all know that trauma stunts growth, and we are absolutely observing that, not only through our test data, but also through our classroom data and our anecdotal data. So, as I frame that a little bit, so looking at our strengths, in English, our students love literature, they love novels. The majority of them have been read to since in utero and then throughout their babyhood and their young adulthood. And it shows. Their literary analysis skills of a single text are quite strong. And when we talk about literary analysis, we're talking about things like understanding plot and setting and character development, understanding what a metaphor is versus a simile, understanding how an author uses imagery to create mood. They're very, very, very good at that skill. I want to point out the fact that I'm saying single text, because I'll get into a little bit more detail when we get to the next slide. Math, they're good at simple equations and expressions, ratios and proportions, statistics and probability. And in science, they're better at more concrete concepts across the domains than they are abstract concepts. And there was a question about that I will get to when we talk about some of the areas of weakness or areas for improvement. I just also want to point out comparatively, if we look at our DART schools, our 6th and 7th grade English classes are in the top 3 to top 5. If we compare ourselves to Cape Ann, our 6th and 7th grade English classes are in the top 2 to top 4. And math, our 7th grade math class is a standout. They're near the top in both DART and Cape Ann. And just a quick overview of the assessments since Tricia did this. So MCAS, let me start with iReady. iReady is an adaptive multiple choice test that works with the student's strengths and gets progressively more difficult as the student moves along. And then as they start to tap out of those more difficult questions, it brings them back. And it brings them to a grade level, which isn't necessarily the best standard to measure students by. We like to look more at standards and what the state sets out in terms of what students need to know and be able to do. And then MCAS is different in that it has constructed responses, short answer responses in math and English and science. And it also has essays. Our kids wrote 4 essays over the course of the 2 English sessions. And those essays are comparative analysis and argument writing primarily. So that transitions us into the areas that need improvement. So you probably noticed, and anyone who at home who's listening that looks at this presentation later, a lot of the bullet points on this slide, as well as the others, areas, plans for progress. Some of the bullets are similar. So I'm going to talk a little bit off the slides as we go, just to give you a little bit more information. But for this year, it's very, very clear that writing is an area that needs a lot of focus and attention. I am comforted, if that's the word, hearing the high school data around writing, because it tells me, okay, we're doing something foundationally that is helping them get to where they get in high school, but that foundational piece that we're doing isn't showing up in our data. Our students, based on the data, they lack idea development and reasoning and stamina. They're low in their vocabulary scores, reading comprehension around informational texts, all genres. So that's articles, essays, current events, textbooks. The list goes on. If it was earlier in the day, I could keep going, but you get the point. And they need help with comparative analysis in both reading and writing. So here's a poem, and here is an article. Read them both and determine the theme and tell what the author's purpose was in writing these two things. An area that they need more work on and need to improve. In math, they're challenged with decimals and fractions, systems of equations, which is, one equation, A plus B equals C. A system of equations is two of those equations side by side. Statistical questions is an area that they need to work more on. Nets, which is turning a three-dimensional object into a two-dimensional object on the page, and geometry. And then science, it's those abstract concepts. So I'm going to get into that next, because I know that was a direct question. So low stamina overall is what we're noticing and what we're seeing in the data, and a low boredom threshold. Our students are digital natives, and they live a large percentage of their life on their phones or on their computers, probably mostly their phones. Diego, you can correct me.
Yeah, I'd say so. See, use of the house, stuff like
Okay,
phones.
so when I talk tech and digital stuff, you just interrupt me and set me straight. So during the pandemic, as I said, our students were between the ages of 9 and 11. They were in their bedrooms, at their kitchen tables, on their computers, with an instructor on the other side. And in many cases, we were just trying to keep them engaged with school. So kids were being assessed on your whole face is on the screen. You're there. It's not your forehead. It's not your ceiling. It's not your wall. You're here every day. We're asking you to do something and you're actually doing it. But we're not necessarily assessing them on, or even really giving them a lot of writing as an example, because writing is a shoulder to shoulder, teacher to student process that takes a lot of time, a lot of direct in the moment feedback. You've done this here, now try this. I'm going to go over and check. I'll be back in 2 minutes and let's see where you are. So that just really couldn't happen. Our teachers did their best and they did breakout rooms and used a lot of new tools, but nothing is a replacement for that face-to-face communication with a teacher. So we're seeing the implications of that. And yeah, so I went through that. I'm just scanning through here. Oh, also something teachers are saying that doesn't show up in the data is that they were noticing this last year. A lesson that would typically take 1 day, they were needing to break into 2 days, 3 days, really stretch it out over time because of that lack of stamina, because of kids getting bored, teachers needing to be more interesting than a YouTube video or a TikTok video. It's a real challenge because our children were starting to eat this diet every single day, this digital diet, which was also being delivered to them through us, through remote learning. So they're developing these synapses in their brain that are requiring quick dopamine hits and things like that, that they're used to from the tech. So that was a challenge before the pandemic. It is a monumental task for us since the pandemic. So it's another area when we think of curriculum and we think of tools and resources that we want to consider in terms of what we will bring in. Overall, our DART analysis in 8th grade, English, we're kind of in the middle. Cape Ann, we're sort of in the middle. For math, we're in 6th grade, we're in the last 3 of our DART schools. That's 11 schools, we're one of them. And in the 8th grade, we're in the lower 50%. So concerning. Our Cape Ann numbers for 6th grade, again, in the middle, 6th and 7th. 8th grade, top 4 in terms of English, or maybe that's math. I didn't make a note, so I'll correct that later. So also, lack of experience in labs. lack of experience with thinking critically. So, you know, you hypothesize, you test, and then you analyze what happened. In science, right now, we call these CERs, which stands for claim, evidence, and reasoning. Read an article or do a lab, make a claim, provide the evidence to that claim. They're there. They can make their claims, they can provide the evidence, but then when they have to give the reasons why the evidence either does or does not match their claim, they're really struggling to do it. When they are reading in civics class and they're reading opinion pieces, they have a difficult time understanding that this is someone's opinion. It's not the person who wrote this article, it's someone else that they interviewed, and that's their opinion. It's a lot for them to really get their head around. That critical thinking is something that's really, really challenging. And I think you'll see that theme continues down into the elementary schools. So, you know, in education, we talk about making the learning sticky, right? You're going to teach a new concept that they may have a little bit of background knowledge on, so you activate that background knowledge to give the new learning something to stick to. And the background knowledge that our kids have, the things that we need to pull up to make sticky, are less available to us because they've been sitting in their bedrooms, you know, coming in half-time, not half-time. You know, our high needs numbers look great because our kids were in school. You know, more of those students were in person, learning in person. So the past couple of years has been really, really challenging, and I could probably talk philosophically and about education and the impact of it all night long, but we don't have all night, so I'm going to keep going. So what we need to do is we need to help our kids make the transition to becoming independent learners and learning that the why has to be within them and that we're not always going to give them the why. So when I observe a classroom, I go around and I say, what are you doing? And they can tell me exactly what they're doing. And then I say, so why? Why are you doing this? Why might this be helpful? And, you know, 70% of the time I get a stare. So I'll probe a little bit more, and they can often come up with it, but it's challenging for most. So plans for progress. I'm off the slides now, so, but it's all, I'm going to be saying basically what's there, and you've all had the benefit of these slides already. So we have a three-pronged, possibly more, but a three-pronged issue in terms of our challenges. We have to look at our curriculum and our resources. We have to have stability in our staffing, which is starting to happen now with some new hires and things. And once we look at curriculum and resources and identify where we're aligned to the standards and where we're not, then we have to determine what we're going to do about that. We might want to have a district level conversation about looking at standards and identifying them as power standards that we can go deeper on rather than trying to hit everything and skimming the surface. But that's a K-12 conversation that we need to have. And we also need to look at whether or not we need professional development for instruction, how to do interdisciplinary instruction, how to do project-based learning, how to differentiate within your classroom when you have 100 students, you know, that are funneling in and out. I should say 80 to 104. Those are our numbers. So it's a lot of things we need to look at and a lot of possible areas for improvement. So my team and I are beginning with looking at our standards, looking at our curriculum, mapping our curriculum out through Aspen, aligning what we're doing now to the standards, getting it all buttoned up. And then once we have that data, digging deeper and seeing where are the gaps and what are the gaps telling us and what do we need to do about those gaps? And do we need some training in terms of how to navigate this landscape? We need the immediate remedial measures, which was a question. So we have the iReady My Learning Path. We're using it in MeBlock. So far it doesn't seem effective. It's November 1st. Let's give it some time. Let's get some more data and see what it tells us. But in the meantime, teachers can use iReady and push lessons through to kids. They can do that individually. They can do that within leveled groups within the classroom through station activities, and that's something that they're starting to do. We can increase our inquiry-based lessons across all content areas and really delve into some of those critical thinking skills. the thing that's challenging with middle school students is, critical and inferential thinking, it's developmental. They're either there or they're not. We had some stunted growth because of the pandemic, so there's probably some lagging skills in terms of when they will be ready for that, developmentally ready for that critical thinking. And it's all over the board, some of them get there sooner than others. So that's something that we need to do more of. And as we do more of it, we need to model metacognitive thinking, which means the teacher has to show how you think about something by doing that out loud with students. And we need to just increase exposure across the board in all classes to more higher order thinking activities. And we need to give them lots of practice, not only with the higher order thinking, but with the basic skills that build the foundation up to be able to get to that higher order thinking. So in science, that's spending more time on the R of the claim, evidence, reasoning. In history classes, it's spending more time on current events, getting them talking more, having them share ideas with peers, and just lots of practice. We need to do a lot more formative assessment. So a summative assessment is something like like MCAS. A formative assessment is an in the moment. So in the classroom, it looks like a quick dipstick thumbs up. Are you with me? You're not with me? Or, hey, I want you to write the basic things we learned on an index card before you leave the class and give it to me so that the teacher can take a look and say they got it or they didn't get it, and then adjust their instruction based on what is happening. In the moment feedback on writing, in the moment feedback on all the work that they're doing, shoulder to shoulder, person to person, because that really does have the most impact on kids. The middle school model is something we will continue to leverage, and one of the things we're doing, we trained the entire faculty in iReady so that everyone at the table is prepared to contribute to the conversation around data, because math and reading aren't just English and math class skills and science class skills. These things happen everywhere. The basic foundational skills that kids learn in these classrooms are deployed in every classroom. So we want to make sure that everyone can understand the data, everyone can contribute. Our engineering teacher could give great insight to our 6th grade math teacher about what he sees in the class in terms of what students are capable of doing. So that's part of the middle school model, and bringing all the adults around the child to celebrate, but to also look at things that are concerns. We need to look at behavioral performance. That also is lagging. I could have a whole presentation on that. So that's another thing. And then, of course, mental health. You just reviewed the YRBS data for the high school, and we're doing our assessment in January. Anecdotally, we're concerned, so we need to wait and see what the data tells us about that. But all of these things impact this, impact the black and white concrete tests that kids take. I'm almost done. I'm going fast. And data chats, that's part of the iReady strategy. We will be incorporating data chats soon. Again, it won't just be the English and math teachers talking to the kids. We will have all the teachers involved in it so students can understand, here's where your strengths are, here's where your challenges are, here's how this strength can benefit this challenge. And who are you as a learner? In middle school, it's all about discovering, who am I? What am I good at? What do I like? What might I want to study, when I go to college and high school? So helping them determine who they are, or begin to determine who they are, how the data and these tests show them that image of themselves, so that maybe they start to lean into that assessments a little bit more, so that they can start to feel like school is something for them rather than something that's happening to them, which is where they're at right now, which is kind of sad. And that's it.
Thanks.
Right.
Okay, sorry, so fast, but a lot of info.
So it was interesting listening, Trish present, and then Joanne. It's kind of a mental trip down memory lane for me, thinking back to how far we've come. I mean, just all of us, Diego said, all of us being in the same room together. It wasn't that long ago that we were on screens. I have a lot of funny stories from back then, but one that stands out was the time that a teacher sent me a screenshot of one of the students in her room. So the student was at his desk looking at the screen, but it was actually a teddy bear with a hat on, not a suit. I have hundreds of stories just like that. That was the reality. And, you know, obviously we're seeing, you know, a bit of an impact. So, we went through a little bit of a different process than we have in the past. We took a very wide angle lens look at the elementary data, which was kind of different for me and challenging because I'm so used to looking at, you know, my own school's data at a very deep level. So all of the things that we're going to talk about are based on the overall elementary data between the two elementary schools combined. You are going to hear some themes. We each went back to our own schools, our own teams. You know, our whole team went off and kind of took a look at the data, grabbed some observations, came back together, and we were all saying the exact same thing or very similar things. And Pam and I looked at each other at one point in a meeting. We're like, oh my God, this is like a recurring theme from the past 10 years. The areas of strength and the areas of weakness. One of the things that we're super fortunate and thankful for is our staff. We have had very consistent staffing at the elementary schools. Substitutes have been a challenge, but in terms of our core staff, they're super talented and they've been with us through the teddy bears and all of those other stories up until now. So we're going to start off with ELA, some observation, and then move through the subjects.
So I would just remind everybody that the good and bad of this is that it's lagging data and, you know, it's old at this stage of the game for our students. And the interesting thing about elementary is that thing called school has changed for them so much in the last couple of years. And some of those students that we have in front of us now didn't know what that looks like or weren't quite sure of those rhythms. So it feels good this time of year to be looking at that because we are seeing those rhythms kind of fall into place. It'll be very interesting to look at the second administration of some of this stuff for us. So for ELA, what we were really kind of happy to see was that some of the core components of English language arts were kind of solidly in there for students. We were happy to see phonological and phonemic awareness, which is the foundation of everything. That's a real credit to the early childhood classrooms and a solid job in getting those foundational skills there. So the kids were even available to look at encoding and decoding. So really, really happy to see that pop up early. Also, the idea that their skills are strengthening over time. When we looked at the cohorts, we could see that over time, that instruction continues to build for them, which is exactly what you want to see as we kind of go through here. Pretty happy with that. They really understand those primary elements of a story. I would argue that's a fiction story at our level. The informational text is not as strong, but for them, particularly on MCAS, it's a fiction story. They understand those particular plots, those types of things that kind of come at them. And vocabulary, as you would expect in communities like Essex and Manchester, is strong. That's use at home. That's not always, you know, from the school itself, but within context, they're very good at being able to pick out what that word means during that particular kind of passage or text. When we look at the comparative schools for us, we're at the 50 percentile or higher for our schools. And so again, that tells us that we're on target and on task with what we're headed at or headed for. The other thing to note, and John will speak to a little bit later, is that in the midst of all the changes, the elementary schools picked up a new reading program. So that is also being implemented right in the heart of some of the concerns that were happening or some of the COVID-related changes in schooling that were happening. Areas for improvement, you're going to see higher order thinking skills, and really all of these things relate to those multiple texts, and we heard it from Joanne, where when they need to analyze and look at a couple of different types of text, a poem compared to another piece of fictional writing, and you know, how do they compare, or what does the author mean when they put those together? What are the themes of both of those? That's a challenge for them in thinking about that. Modeling needs to take place for that. Lots of conversations take place for that. It comes along, but they didn't have that practice, we would argue. Comprehension, certainly of longer text, and there's that reading stamina. We would like to see obviously improve over time. We saw a dip in that. Essay writing, everyone's spoken a little bit about the test, but I think what's most challenging at the elementary level is that it's all on the computer. let's think about those typing skills for a little bit. And the box is an expandable box. So when kids first start to write in that box, they fill the box and they think, yeah, and that's a sentence. And, they don't quite understand, they need to keep going. So the stamina and the writing and the idea analysis and really extension is missing for them in elementary in this particular round of assessments. Claiming support, again, it's back to multiple tests. So again, the analogy that Joanne used about this item and pull it all together is dead on accurate for elementary kids. Speak to the math, I think.
Go back.
Oh, yeah, okay, there's a challenge for you. Back one, there we go. It doesn't want to be on that.
All right, so, obviously, this data is really vast and deep, and you can look at it from a million different angles. One of the angles that we tried to look at it from was looking at the way our students perform versus how the state performed on average. And there's a relative gap that we expect that our students will perform higher than the state average. So we kind of honed in on those questions and those topic areas where that gap wasn't as big as we thought it should be. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I guess it's kind of the point of the presentation in a way. Our kids in math are really good in general at getting the correct answer. So if it's a computation question, if it's an operation question, interpreting one-step simple word problems, algebraic representation, they're really good at kind of giving that information back to us in the form of a correct answer. One of the things that we're seeing, again, and this is a theme, is Trish called it HOTS. I'd never heard that before, but higher order thinking skills. So any question where they ask students to kind of use your knowledge here, solve this piece of this problem here, grab this piece of information here, and put it all together to solve this novel problem over here that you've never seen before, that's something that's really challenging for our students. Challenging for a lot of kids developmentally at this age, but when we looked at where we perform compared to the C, we'd like to see the scores a little bit higher there, performance a little higher there. Two-step word problems, that's another thing that the kids had a hard time, so kind of solve this in order to solve that. The reciprocity between the operations of multiplication and division, and then manipulation of 3D shapes. So those are some kind of more specific areas, but in general, getting the correct answer, they're really good at, and then we want to work over time to help them solve those more complex analytical problems in math.
So you're going to hear us talk a little bit later about authentic learning, and the one place that instruction looks different in elementaries is when it comes to science class, and it's much more authentic. There's much more activity, there's much more hands-on approach, solving problems. So it's that problem-solving approach, it's authentic, how does this relate to something that you know? And we see that kids at the elementary level have performed much, much better when that approach is in play. They were really great at knowing what to measure when it comes to an investigation. Strangely enough, while they can't make the claims work for themselves when it comes to a text, they can do the claim when it comes to scientific reasoning. So they can figure out what it is that their experiment proves when it comes to satisfying their claims or supporting their claims in science, but they cannot do that as well when it comes to just text material. They can change the outcome of an investigation by deliberately altering one of the variables within the context of that. Although when it comes to supporting or areas for improvement, they have trouble sometimes identifying independent and dependent variables. So sometimes they're unsure about which one of those are controllable. At times, they don't quite know how to improve the experiment to get a different outcome or to get a better outcome or make it much more efficient. And then again, to Joanne's point, creating a model that shows evidence and reasoning is a challenge for them, even at the science element of that, even at the science level.
So the challenge that we have in front of us is when we look at the data, and it is a common theme that you're hearing throughout the state, the youngest students were impacted the most by the pandemic. And so when we look at the data, I personally am most concerned about the non-MCAS grades, so K to 2. So when we look at our iReady data, that's the area of most concern for me. If you look at our grades 3 through 5 over the course of the pandemic, so 2019 to last year, we actually went up in science in both schools during that time. And at Memorial, we went up in math as well. We did see a decline in ELA, so that is a concern. Again, Sheila mentioned that we did implement a new ELA program during this time period. So anytime you implement a new program, you do see an implementation typically. So we're hoping that's what that was, but also implementing a new curriculum program during a pandemic when everyone was remote and we were trying to train the teachers on this new program. Even if you can imagine how it was delivered to the school during that time when the world was locked down and getting the materials out to people, and it just was not a typical implementation. So we're working to kind of backfill there. So I think our challenge is we are the foundation. So we are where the kids need to build those skills that will lead to success later on in older grades. But we need to figure out a way over the next number of years to figure out how to balance the skills and the skill development with the higher order thinking skills. So we've got ideas of how we can help kids think differently, but we at the elementary level, we really need to think about that time balance and how that's going to play out. So I think we're gonna have to look at education differently once again in the coming years. Pam, as in one of our meetings, we were talking about the authentic learning piece, and she said, it's kind of the frontier of the new education, and that will take some time, I think, to get there. But I think we have an idea of the target, where we need to go. Writing is certainly a concern, as it was in the other grades as well. The stamina, topic development, conventions, that sort of thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to use our data to guide differentiated instruction and also to provide interventions with the iReady tool that we have now. It's a little bit of a different language in terms of the student performance data, universal screening, and the progress monitoring data. The language is a little bit different, so we're learning how to use that to improve what's happening for kids at the student level. Like the other levels, we're going to continue to work to align our curriculum, map our curriculum out, and compared to or align it to the standards. And identify any gaps that we have. So we know that we do have some gaps in certain curriculum areas. Kind of like what Diego was talking about with, that's actually a huge gap with the geometry. But at the elementary level, we may have some small gaps here and there. We want to start thinking about reducing teaching skills in isolation and not having kind of those different silos, but having skills and knowledge that can be transferred across the disciplines. And then we provide the students with opportunities for integrating their thinking and being able to analyze and compare and contrast and do some of these higher level complex problem solving activities. So that's the plan. Certainly a challenge. It's definitely caused us as a team to look at things differently. Some of the things that we have been very proud of over the years. We want to continue those things, but there's this whole different way of thinking to help the kids think about problem solving differently.
Back to where we began.
We are. So thank you all very much. You did a great job diving in there. As we think about moving forward, you heard each of the principals speak to a couple of things. And one is the need for the alignment of our curriculum. As we were introducing iReady and looking at a standard that says at grade level, we knew a couple of things, that the iReady system is aligned to the Massachusetts frameworks. And it is normed within anybody else in the state that's using the system. And there are hundreds of schools using the system. So as we started to have discussion about can we really identify what grade level is? What grade level should look like at each grade in our schools, our elementary schools and middle schools? There was a little bit of hesitation. And it just gave us information, really good information, that we need to do a deeper dive into the learning standards and make sure that our curriculum is well aligned. And if it's not, where are those gaps and what do we need to do to fill it so that we can all speak confidently about what grade level should look like here in Manchester, Essex. So the alignment work is something that is being done through curriculum mapping, as well as at the high school. They're a little further along with that alignment work, but what they are now doing is taking those curriculum maps and aligning it to the vision of the graduate so that they can incorporate more authentic learning experiences for the students, so that students can become more actively involved in their own learning process. The other thing that you heard principals talk about is multi-tiered systems of support, or maybe referred to as MTSS. And I just would like to explain a little bit what the shift is there, because this district has always had very strong response to intervention, which is an RTI system. So you're able to identify students who are struggling and then provide students with short-term intervention to help get them to the benchmark that you want them to be at. Making the shift to a multi-tiered system of support is about being a little more proactive to try to avoid as many students needing intervention by really focusing on tier 1, which is the core. What's happening in core instruction, and what are we doing to differentiate instruction, which you've heard every principal talk about, to offer as many different kinds of learning experiences for students and remove the obstacles to their learning in tier 1, so that we're reaching more students and can help everybody, can boost that core for everyone. That doesn't eliminate the need for short-term intervention. That doesn't eliminate the fact that we are offering short-term intervention. So on top of the core, then you can layer in short-term intervention with interventionists for students who are not achieving at grade level at this point, or are showing some achievement gaps along the way, as well as layering in my path, which you've heard about. And Joanne started to tell you that the iReady assessment is an adaptive assessment. That means the assessment adapts as the student answers questions. Questions either get harder or they get easier, depending on how the student is answering the question before it. In turn, the system takes that information and develops what is called My Path, which is based on the skill set that was identified through the diagnostic. So it really individualizes this learning tool to how the student performs. And based on whether their skill set is high, it will provide them with enrichment beyond the grade level. If their skill set is not at the grade level, it will provide them with support beneath the grade level. So it's new, we're implementing this, but all of these things are in addition to the core. So it should all boost a child no matter where they are in their learning process. So those are two major things that are underway right now that are really going to give us a foothold in where we need to go, what we understand about where we are, and what we're doing to try to meet the individual needs of the students that are in front of us. And then, of course, we also have to look beyond the scores. And being someone who came into this district just last year, I have to tell you how impressed I am with the work that you've done on your strategic plan. And as I thought about how do you wrap this up, and you think about all of those things that are beyond the scores and all the things that we try to do every day as educators to remove any of the obstacles or the barriers that might be in the way to a student being able to learn? What are the things that we have to put in place to help every student be available to learn? And those are all of those other elements. And I think that you speak to that so perfectly in your strategic plan, where you talk about the theory of action. And if you would indulge me, I would just like to remind you of what that says, because I really think you've stated it best. If we keep students at the center of decision-making and practice, cultivate a collaborative culture and inclusive culture, articulate the relationship between social emotional well-being and student achievement, engage in two-way communication with our community, then students will realize their individual, unique, and highest potential, achieve academic excellence, value integrity and honesty, and become intellectually curious and critical thinkers. I think it brings it right back to everything that you heard the principals say today and tells me how well aligned the district goals are to the work that needs to be done here. So thank you all so much for that.
Done.
Okay, moving back up, so I'm not
Thank you
blocking
guys
people
very,
again.
very much.
I didn't know if it was going over to you, Allison. I was gonna fall, no, I'm just.
Well, while we transition,
Yeah.
we're a little bit over time, not too bad. But this is the core of what we do. And I'm just so impressed with how it's been articulated. It is beyond a number. It is beyond a comparable. It's really about taking stock of where we are as we exit the pandemic and chart our course for the next few years. So I think they've done a fantastic job of digesting it and trying to make it understandable in a way that's not just reading you charts and graphs, but we're here for questions as long as you need us.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
We need
So
another cognitive break.
do we want to, or do we want to just dive right in? Let's just dive right in. We're in it. We're in it, folks. So we're going to take questions, and for those watching now or at another time, of course, we had this information in advance. We were able to dive deep and ask questions in advance. Big thanks go out to those who sent them in advance so our people could work a lot of those specific nitty-gritty kinds of questions into the presentation, which is really helpful. So we are going to do questions. We're all mindful of our protocols with respect to time and respecting one another's time and knowing what we have, but we want to make sure that questions get answered as well. So my invitation is that we consider just keeping in mind that probably most of us will have questions, keeping in mind the questions as they pertain to our charge in particular would be top priority for a business meeting. And that if we do have other questions or we have more nitty gritty questions, we could send them to Pam.
Sure.
And she could filter them on too as appropriate. So keeping that in mind, things that are really more niche kinds of questions. So that being the case, I just have one and I'll hold it till the end. Chris, do you have any questions for this wonderful team?
No, I don't think so. I looked through it beforehand. More of a statement. I think we all know the impact that past few years has had on education just across the board. So it's really just nice to see that there's an action plan in place to get back to where we were to a certain extent. And in that way, I would just say, continue to look at classes as they move up. A lot of this data is compared, this year compared to the 10th grade class last year. And I think I mentioned this in this same meeting last year. We're a small district, a few numbers can really throw things off for us. So just kind of comparing the classes as they move through is, I think, valuable as well. That's it.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes, thank you, everybody. That was great. That was a lot of information. I understand, Angela, what you were saying about having a sort of a new starting point post-pandemic. Now that we have these kind of two data points last spring and spring before, what do our student growth percentiles look like compared to, other districts?
Are they running full student growth?
They put out student growth percentiles, but they were calculated differently, and I would have to look that up. I remember that was in our district presentation early on from the state. So I'm not sure that we'd be looking at growth percentiles the same way that we have in the past.
Yeah.
I think we'll be headed into that again, but it will be starting with this baseline.
Okay.
So I don't think I can fully
Yeah,
answer
that's
that
fine.
question for you.
Because of where the test gaps are, the classes that would have meaningful years of which to calculate the growth percentile don't exist.
But even from,
The
say.
21
last
was only a
year's
half
third
test, so it's not
graders,
really being seen as, 22 was the first real test in 2 years.
Last
20
year
and
was only
21
half
are-
a test.
20
Right,
was-
but they had scores last year, right? So they had an ELA score and a math score, but they're not using those for SGP.
Yeah, they're not comparable.
Because the 21 was only a half test. It wasn't a comparable exam. But we can follow up and get you the tech, I
Yeah.
recall those.
I
Yeah.
looked at the growth
Since
scores
it's-
and I considered including them, but I just didn't see their value for this year, the data, the limited data.
And then Sheila and John, I know that there were some discrepancies between the two schools in terms of MCAS performance. Are you seeing similar patterns through the iReady data?
That's a good question.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't necessarily surprise us.
Mhm.
One thing that I would find I guess from an elementary perspective, what I keep using as an analogy and it's a little concerning for me for iReady scores is that they're very skill driven at the elementary level. And for me, that feels like, do you have all of the Lego pieces to make a castle, right? But can you make the castle is the question of the day. And so we will be working on some, what is the benchmark understanding for what kids can do at this time of year, for each trimester. We hope to be working on some pieces like that because that's the part that we feel like will add to the story, right? Because they might have all those pieces, but they still can't quite perform. And that's where we all get frustrated, right? We think they've got it all and then they can't quite pull it off. But I would say the iReady, we're still analyzing it. The teams have been working, our data teams meeting coming up in the next month. So they'll be looking a little closer at those.
Yeah, I think one of the things that might be surprising is, it varies from grade to grade.
Yeah, sure.
So my incoming kindergarten data for iReady is pretty low. That's what I was alluding to earlier, that's where I'm concerned. I think it's the
First grade.
Yeah, first grade, yeah, so it's almost reversed. My first grade is, the data is a little stronger. My incoming kindergarten data is weaker than Essex incoming kindergarten data.
Pretty consistent at the early childhood grades are not where we want them to be. And that's understandable when you think about where they've been for the last couple of years. The others, I think cohort data is going to matter and we'll take a closer look.
And have you found that the flexibility with the MTSS model and our specialists going back and forth is helping you to provide those targeted supports where they're needed?
Yeah, right now we don't have any transfer because the need is identified in both spots. But obviously that's the goal, that you bring kids up so that you can make that adjustment. But we're really happy with the fact that they have targeted the right students. So we're very confident that they're getting in where they need to get in.
Great. Okay.
Actually, and just one other piece about that is the same profile student, regardless of which school they're at, are getting
Yeah.
the same level of support, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You read my mind.
Which is,
That's right.
which is new.
That's right.
I know that might sound crazy, but it's new.
Yeah. I'll pass you the talking.
Erica.
Thank you. Excuse me. I guess I would echo, I think, Joanne, you said that while these tests and this data does not mean everything, it is nevertheless concerning. I mean, there's definitely things that are concerning, and for me, one thing that concerns me most is that as you get higher on in the educational process, there's less and less time to remediate. So I have some real concerns, and Diego raised exactly the concern I've had just based on my experience as a parent with 2 high schoolers. Whether there might be some ways, I've heard a lot of us talk tonight about doing a deeper dive, which is completely understandable, and we're dealing with a lot of data and need more information. And yet at the same time, I think there is some urgency, especially as we talk about high schoolers. I've seen with my senior, it's really hard to approach next levels in math when you don't have the foundational skills, and hallelujah, his applications are out and it's what will be. But for the kids that are still in the mix and still needing to grasp onto those geometry principles that they missed, I guess I would echo Diego's interest in figuring out if there is a way we can somehow focus on some of those targeted skills, because whether it's for pre-calc or AP Calc or SATs or even physics, they need them with some degree of time sensitivity.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm like allowed to talk here or whatever.
Talk, Diego.
I think like the only like thing that I don't know if I took an issue with it, but like you see all the numbers and they're concerning, and like I think a lot of people were, and it's good that everyone's talking about like how to improve the future scores and like, all right, if we do this, we'll see change in a couple of years. But like what you just said, Miss Spencer, like kids like me and all my friends and all the kids in my grade, like although for the district it might be good, and you have to like improve the future grades, like there are issues that like I think need to be addressed like in the short term, like immediately, and there needs to be things that you can do to help us right now, because like I need to take the SAT and I need to take these math classes, and like changes in a couple of years aren't really gonna help me with that, even though they're important. So I totally 110% agree with what you just said.
Could we phrase that into a question? So
Yeah.
is there
So that-
anything right now?
That was gonna be-
So,
Yeah.
I mean, in starting like a separate geometry class for our older students, that there is a resource behind that, and it's something that we could look at implementing maybe during a second semester if we continue to have extra staff. And or what we're having our teachers do, and Diego, you spoke to this a little bit in your pre-calc classes, teachers going back and reteaching things, like really having an understanding that students haven't mastered these standards yet, and having the empathy, having the understanding that they need to go back and reteach it. So that's one place where we have made a targeted response for the students in your grade level and in grade 11. Grade 12, we're a little bit beyond the students that are in physics. I don't have a good, Erica, I wish I had a really good answer for you. I really do. But maybe adding the second semester geometry class for students who are interested.
I wonder if you might consider, and just like taking it to the school council, the possibility of, it sounds to me hard to achieve a full geometry class, but what I saw as a gap for my 12th grader, and I really mean it, like, I think we're past helping the 12th graders, we're where we're at, but we can help Diego's class.
Yep.
And maybe to consider if we could add an SAT type prep, or a class that focused on the specific aspects of geometry that might help them on their upcoming assessments. So really that means like how to prepare them for SATs or ACTs, focusing on the gaps that they had in their high school education. So
That's definitely something we can look at for a second semester. I mean, if we have the staffing, there's no reason why.
Well, what I would say to kind of close the loop on this is, I heard it with Diego, I hear the second, I hear willingness, and it's a funding issue, and we'll look at funding and see if something can be.
Yep, we have time to do.
But I
the
can't
second
commit to
semester.
anything right now because I need to go through my.
of course. And the
My ledger.
other kind of question or comment about high school was, if I'm reading the numbers correctly, and it was a lot of numbers and hard to absorb, so I may have a mistake here, but grade 8, I believe, was one place where I observed particularly challenging numbers where more than 50% of the class wasn't meeting expectations in ELA or math. And what that seems to me to translate to is that by those same eighth graders are now in high school, right?
Ninth grade,
So,
yep. They're ninth grade.
right, yes, they're freshmen, that's what I meant. And so I'm wondering how the high school now looking at an incoming class of freshmen, 50% of whom are below standards. I know that you addressed many things that are plans for improvement, but I think your plans were based on G10 scores. So I'm curious how you're wrapping in this class of freshmen who seem like they have gaps that are going to need to be addressed as well.
I think, particularly in ELA, the amount of writing and grammar and reading that our students do in grade 9 has served us in increasing our scores by the grade 10 MCAS test. In math, again, I think going back to kind of readjusting some of our standards, having our special education teacher from the middle school teaching our high needs students in grade 9 and grade 10 can help to fill those gaps.
And also, just keep in mind that the numbers we're showing you combine partially meeting and not meeting into one group. The percentage of students actually not meeting is less than 10% across all content areas. So there are many students, I'm sure I haven't done the analysis, but could, that are what we call on the cusp. So they're right around that 500 mark, which is the cutoff between partially meeting and meeting. And oftentimes those students will pop right up into meeting expectations with just tier 1 classroom instruction. So because those numbers are combined, it looks very dire, but if you pull out the not meeting from those numbers, it's a much smaller percentage.
This is the meeting and exceeding.
Oh, this is meeting and
Meeting
exceeding.
exceeding,
Okay, so I'm
yeah.
with the partially meeting and not meeting, it's 51, 54, and 41. So big percentages, but of those percentages, it's less than 10% that are not meeting. So the other half of the equation, based on what that is showing.
One thing that'll be interesting to see around math is students do have the option in 9th grade to go straight into geometry or to take Algebra 1. We do have that flexibility. We typically just have one section of the Algebra 1. So it will be interesting to see if we have more students who feel like they need to do the Algebra 1 or whose parents feel like they need to do it. And the schedule is always flexible based on enrollment, the sections based on enrollment. So that will be interesting to see after seeing these numbers, but it is an option in order to ensure that students have a firmer foundation in algebra before jumping into geometry.
Did you have any other questions, Erica?
Joanne, when do you think you'll be in a position to know whether or not iReady is a tool that is going to help address some of the deficits that you're working toward?
So based on the research around the tool itself, I feel very confident that it is a tool that will help us. It's a matter of integrating that tool into the way we do what we do. I think the January diagnostic assessment will give us a glimpse. But at the end of the year, clearly we'll have more information around the My Learning Path approach. After January's assessment, I'll make some decisions with my team around the My Learning Path approach through MeBlock and whether or not we want to adjust that. But I think we need to give it at least a full school year to really make some definitive statements
Are you
around.
contemplating changing the placement of MeBlock in order to better capture?
That is something I'm thinking of, yeah. We used to have it right after lunch, right around E-block time. And for many reasons, I'm contemplating moving it back, but we've shifted the schedule so much, I just needed some stability for everyone. But even anecdotally, teachers are saying that at the end of the day, kids are just, they're fried. first thing in the morning was another thought, but they're all asleep. So, so we need to kind of catch them at their peak, which is closer to lunchtime. But yeah, that is something that we are definitely looking into.
I wonder if that's why you're seeing so few. I mean, it's disappointing to think that the effort to put them in front of screens, which is the thing that we're seeing is decreasing their stamina.
Mhm.
We're putting them in front of screens, but then they're not able to do it. It just.
Yeah.
I think, if I could just
No,
add
yeah,
to that,
absolutely.
Joanne, excuse me. I think the other part that Joanne was speaking to that has not yet been implemented is that whole data conversation component, which is a really important element of using MyPath, where the teacher really sits individually with the student and they can talk about the scores and the diagnostic and do some goal setting together. And then the student is working towards incremental goals in MyPath. And it can really change the whole face of how that process is going, rather than just being in front of a screen and working independently. You're working collaboratively with your teacher to set your goals, and then you're working towards a certain level of goal, a benchmark, before you set your next benchmark.
Ideally, my learning path would be integrated into the curriculum in every classroom. It's a new tool. There's some growing pains with it. Kids are very vocal about not liking it, which is making the teachers feel resistant about pulling it into the classroom because they don't want to disengage the kids within the class. There are ways to do it though, and we're talking about ways to do it simply, easily, quick 5-minute hits over the course of a week and things like that. We all need to go through the growing pains and get to a place of acceptance and move forward to a place where it's integrated more.
Is the conversation Angela just mentioned contemplated to be between the Me Block teacher and the students, or the actual subject matter teacher?
So we, again, want to make sure every teacher is part of the data, part of the process. So it will be all teachers, not necessarily Me Block. We'll figure it out. It may be E-Block teachers. We're going to see how we're going to work it out and kind of set the system for making sure that kids have that individual time while that teacher's teaching and that teacher's, or while that teacher's out and the class is covered.
Anna, do you have any questions?
One is for all the principals. So I thought it was really helpful to looking at the slide, the Boston Globe Top 10 slide, because I think the Boston Magazine, we are ranked number 4, right? I just look it up.
Based on.
So compared to all these 10 schools listed here, even though we're ranked number 4, ELA, we are the lowest and the second lowest across from grade 3 to 10. So in each, middle school, high school, and elementary schools, you'll talk about the curriculums and you're gonna look into it and whatnot. So do you guys all comprehensively looking at CLA together to see why this is? Because it cannot be COVID because all the schools went through COVID. So when that's why I'm just looking at it from a data perspective. So to me, it's interesting to see how ELA across the board, across all schools within the district are low compared to the top 10. The second question is, MCAS, even though it's actually a good tool for us to evaluate the student performance, I personally think that, the question is, are we also using this as a tool to evaluate the department and the teacher performance? Because I think we talk about some of the factors, and there could be many factors about why the different grades are doing not so well. Other than the COVID and other external factors, staffing, how are we addressing? Sometimes it's because the teacher performance, and how do you look into that? So I have one kid that's in 7th grade. So looking at the 8th grade data concerns me. 7th grade data doesn't look that great either. And hearing about high school issues also concerns me. But so that's why I'm asking if at some point, do we also evaluate the teachers' quality as well?
I can start. Yep. So for the Boston Magazine Top 10 and ELA, we're actually number five on that list, just in grade 10. That was one of our stronger areas, actually. But there are other areas we certainly need to improve upon. In terms of teacher evaluation, that's definitely an ongoing process, and data is used as part of that process. There are times when making changes is easier than other times. And pick my words right, but we have had some struggles at the high school that we've been addressing. So I guess where I can leave it at. Thank you.
In terms of comparative data, I have to be frank that I lean more heavily on our DART analysis because those are the schools that the state says we are most similar to in terms of cohort and other factors. Because we're a small school and we have one teacher in each subject area at each grade level, it's impossible to separate instruction from the evaluation process of the data. So when we look at the things that need to be taken into consideration and we start first with curriculum and making sure things are aligned with the standards, that's the first place to start. And then we do have to look at instruction. We have to look at are there skill deficits in instruction? Do teachers need training in differentiated instruction, project-based learning? Do they need help or time to plan interdisciplinary things? So it's really impossible to separate the teacher from the data at the middle school level because there's just one teacher at each level. So that is something that is taken into consideration, absolutely.
I think there is some good news at the elementary level in our performance against our comparables on the DART list. So those are the schools, as was mentioned, that the state says are most comparable to us in terms of our size and our demographics. And so just as an example, for Memorial School in ELA grades 3 through 5 combined, we were tied for second in that list. So Honeywell School in Wellesley was first at 78, and we were tied with Plymouth River and Hingham at 72. And then in Essex, they have a different list. Each school has a different list of comparables because we're different sizes, different demographics. A lot of times in school, in districts. So for example, I was in Situate before here. My school had 650 students. The other schools had, 2 to 250. So just, the data is just a little bit different. So Essex has a different group of comparables, and in ELA for grades 3 through 5, they were, right in the middle of that group. So I think there is some good news there. And dark comparisons.
Thank you, Annie. Good questions. Jake?
So first of all, thank you all for the process that you've gone through on this. I know it's a lot of work and I'm sure there are a lot of people under and with you that help contribute to all this. And, working together at elementary levels to think about it coherently. So very much appreciate what went into this. So I have a couple requests and a couple questions. So first of all, on the request side, when we talk about some of our efforts like iReady and MTSS, if we could be clear about which subject areas those are really about, rather than speaking them as if they apply to every subject area. And I think that's important because it highlights the foundations we're laying in those subject areas that will eventually inform how we work across subject areas. But it also reminds us of the work we still need to do beyond ELA and math. Because those iReady and MTSS as examples only apply when you're looking at the state standards to those subject areas. So we still have kind of those kind of efforts to take on for social studies, art, science, so on. The second thing, I'm always sensitive to how we kind of speak to student perspective here. And so a clear theme across your presentations is student stamina. And I know you did not intend that to be a judgment on students, but it can be interpreted that way. And so I just want us to be clear about what is that really a proxy for? Or what is it that we might have influence over that could address that? Rather than say it's about student stamina, what is it that is contributing to that observation? So that's my second request. So first question, both high school and middle school, you called out kind of the need to focus on high needs student populations in terms of additional support. I always worry that that can lead to additional kind of segregation of that population. I don't think that's what you're intending, and I heard the notion of looping. Can you just talk a little bit more about how you provide that attention to that population without segregating them from, like, you know, via pullout out of other classes or something? How do you do that in a way that they maintain that cohort and with their other peers?
So at the high school, we have a pretty strong co-taught model that's in place in ELA, English, math, and social studies. In math, for example, we would have our subject area teacher and a special ed teacher working together to teach the class. And it's not the special ed teacher sitting in the back or just like helping one student. It's actually the special ed teacher teaching the course with the regular ed teacher. We have found that model to truly support all of our students. Those classes are not solely for special education students. They are a mix of regular ed and special education students.
We also have a co-taught model in English. And we also have, beyond the English classroom, we have classrooms, general ed classrooms that are supported by either a special educator or a teaching assistant. We have, within the multi-tiered systems of support, we focus on tier 1, which is the classroom, as often as possible. We also have the learning, we call it the Learning Center, which is a place for students identified as general education students or students on 504 plans where they can go and get assistance. Of the students identified as high needs within this data, 67% of those students are already being supported either in a specialized program or a small group, math or English class, or through co-teaching. So what is encouraging to us is that the data is telling us what we already know and have responded to, have been responding to for many, many years, from elementary right up into middle school.
I just want to call attention to the fact, oh, thank you for pulling that up, Pam. That when we look at high need students, that there's a significant number of low income students in that cohort as well, which those students are not segregated in any way. We also have English language learners who receive sheltered English immersion, and we have teachers trained around that. So we do have a lot of inclusive practices around students with disabilities. I just want to make sure we're clear that that high needs population also includes some other groups.
Great. So the second question dives a little bit into some of the appendix data you gave us. And looking at the MCAS data from students who are, you know, meeting expectations or exceeding expectations, basically kind of a measure of whether or not they're on grade level. And then looking at the iReady data about whether or not they're on grade level. For many cases, those track pretty well. The place that it doesn't seem to track is elementary mathematics. There's sometimes 30 or 40% difference between the MCAS and the iReady. And actually 7th grade math is the only other place that really does that. But can you, any insights into why that might be, or?
Yeah, we've been talking about what does that mean when iReady says on grade level? And when it says, what's the term? It's one grade level below. So a theory we came up with that we have to see if is accurate or not is if you're on grade level in June and then you transition to September and you take the assessment and you have a little bit of summer regression, it puts you, let's say you have a month of summer regression, it puts you back to June, which would say that you're one grade level behind. It doesn't mean you're 365 days behind. So we're hoping that when we do the winter data collection that changes, but we're not entirely certain. And we're also like Angela mentioned, we want to look at what does on grade level mean for this assessment compared to what does on grade level mean for our expectations here.
We also want to do a little tighter analysis, of the types of questions and that are being asked. So again, iReady is a screener and MCAS is not a screener. So there's much more complicated, kind of in-depth questions that are generally asked from MCAS versus a screener that is just trying to get to some top level stuff. So yeah, that's part of the reason that the elementaries in particular are holding a little tight on this data, because we want to make sure we can explain it well enough when parents ask that question.
Okay. So the last thing I think is probably just a little bit more informational for us, but it does relate to your kind of theme of higher order thinking. And so I think it's useful for us to realize that one of the significant changes in the standards in the 2015, 2016 is a shift away from kind of the Bloom's taxonomy verbiage and kind of expectations, right? That kind of higher order language to languages of disciplinary practice, right? The skills that and that stands for and assumes that students are able to do higher order thinking to engage in those practices. And I think maybe, Joanne, that was one thing that I was getting confused. And I think your explanation of the concrete versus abstract is illustrative of concrete being kind of the core concepts, the disciplinary concepts, the knowledge, and the abstract being the practices. What can you do with it? Right. And I think to some extent that transition from higher order thinking to practices in the standards is a lot of what I hear you say needs to be beefed up and worked on. What can they do and how can they apply their knowledge?
And that's what the next generation assessment is about. So when people, standardized testing, they rail against it. I didn't feel this way so much with the legacy assessment, but I feel it with the next generation assessment, that these are life skills. You need to be able to have an opinion, argue that opinion, compare things, analyze things. So this test is getting to the core of life skills. But in some cases, it is a developmental leap for some of our kids.
We'll also say it asks for transference, right? What you learned in a different now circumstance. And certainly that's where we're seeing at the elementary level, they're struggling with transference.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. My question is based on conversations I've had. First, I really appreciate Anna's question about the putting in context that all the schools dealt with COVID. Like everybody dealt with COVID, and everybody's having to look at their results right now. And for me, the more interesting part for that will be down the line when analysis happens over the next 10, 15, 20 years of what happened during these, across all districts and that sort of thing. And I'm really looking forward to that just for interest purposes. My question mostly has to do with conversations I'm already having with people in the community, with people, with parents, but also other community members who are looking at return on investment and who have kids who aren't necessarily in these groups of kids that are needing all this remediation. And so while I feel really hopeful about remediation efforts, I trust, I mean, our district has shown that we do a good job educating, right? This is a good educational system. And so I have every confidence that you guys will move forward and help bring people back and get across this leap. The question I have is, what would you say? What would you have us say? How would you help us help families and other community members understand how this is going to impact kids that are not falling behind, who are perhaps concerned about all the focus on tier 1 support and how that's going to take away from the students who are doing just fine, or who, especially at the K through 8, where we don't have differentiated levels of classroom, who are already feeling maybe not challenged academically in the same ways. And this is a conversation that I have over and over and over, not just since, MCAS came out. So what would you say to those families, or what would you have us understand to share with them?
Yeah, I think you're kind of saying exactly what we're planning to do, which is you know, that higher level analytical problem solving, you know, that really is going to take those higher level kids to the next level. We did talk a lot about remediation because we have these new tools and that sort of thing. And we do, at the elementary level, you know, we do have to lay that foundation, but our goal in helping kids perform better on more complex tasks really does lend itself to those students who are behind and don't need the remediation. So I think they'll benefit tremendously from it over the next 5-10 years.
And I'll add, if you remember the school improvement plans, we talked about creating a definition for authentic learning, taking a closer look at that. That's the transference that we're talking about.
Yep.
That it's not, we're not sure what that looks like, and we need to strengthen what that looks like. That project-based problem-centered learning for students, because those are the kids, they get it, they'll get it in that moment and they're doing well, but they don't always do well when you transfer it. And that's where parents get surprised, like, what? I thought my kid was doing well. And it's in that transference that you see the strength of it. So we have all of that. Also, I'll just reference the my path that Angela and Joanne spoke to. That's not about remediation. That's about starting where they're at. So they can definitely move forward kind of linearly there. I would just not want to put all our eggs in that basket because that will just get you linear. That doesn't get you transference.
And I don't love the idea of relying on a computer program to do this. So that's why I'm sort of taking that part out of the conversation on this. So am I hearing you right then? To categorize what you're saying is that with the interventions that are coming into place, because we're already from a strategic plan standpoint, coming at things from a slightly different way, these kids are going to rise together. It's going to bring everybody up, no matter where you're starting.
Right.
Am I hearing that?
That's right.
I think so, yeah.
And if you look at the vision of the graduate, you know, descriptors and the work that we've detailed through our strategic plan and more individualized learning, and I'm speaking for you, but the high school, in some cases, moving away from the test and more into a project, that's where students like this will thrive. And when you think of universal design for learning, you know, you build a ramp for someone who's in a wheelchair perhaps, but it benefits all.
Yep.
And that's when we talk about differentiated instruction and supporting the tier 1 environment, it's about implementing UDL in that so that all are benefiting from the supports that are there, perhaps for some that need remediation, but it still helps students who don't need it.
Right. And for anybody who's listening, UDL, instruction practice, that expands reach. One thing I'm going to throw on that though is we need to be careful because we are working and our strategic plan points us in that direction, and the data as we analyze it shows us we need to go in a different direction. We aren't going to be able to rely on these types of assessments to always show that we are doing better than or that people are succeeding, because if we do it well and we succeed, we're going to be moving further away from rote, further away from drill. Now we're talking about the fact that the test doesn't necessarily measure that anymore, but it is still a traditional style test and it can only go so far. I think there's ongoing conversation of whether it's seen its day. It needs to be sunset and something else needs to come into its place. Something like portfolio review, which is a multi-year gathering of your progress and then a demonstration at the end. So I think folks who are comfortable and rely on traditional metrics, it's going to get more challenging for them to see our success. We have to get better at explaining what success looks like in this new mode. But that is why, that's kind of what we're trying to articulate in the plan. And that's the big heavy lift ahead of us. I hate the comparable charts. We do look, we want to see how we're doing against others, whether we're out there alone. I think that's a big question. It's a question that's going to emerge in our budget discussions. We like to compare ourselves against the high performing districts. Well, you peel off the layer of scores and take a look at their infrastructure and their financing, and you're going to see a gap. We'll do a gap analysis for you. It's a very different environment. The DART schools seem foreign to us at some time because those aren't the schools that we often look to say, hey, that's one of our comparables. And Hamilton Wenham tends to always emerge as the one that shows up on every list, so kind of becomes one of our true norths. I think you have to put it in context. Different kids, different situations. Everyone handled the pandemic. We all went through it We all handled it different. We all place value in different areas. So pandemic's not an excuse. I think we end where we start, which it's the new baseline, pointing us in a direction. And I think Angela makes a good observation. And it's an observation made by everyone in their own environment. We have pointed ourselves in the right direction to address the problems that we have. We just need to give ourselves the time and energy to get there, because it is going to ultimately come back to classroom instruction, as Anne said, and executing on that. So I think we're in a good position.
Well, thank you all, and thank everyone for your thoughtful questions, and thank you for riding it out with us. Poor Diego, he tried so hard.
I know.
He stayed so long. Okay,
All right,
thank you.
guys very much.
So,
So I'm gonna just go down and you're
I would say 9 is a safe bet.
all right, I'll be there between 8 and 10.
I haven't heard anything. I will let you know if I get
Okay.
get any
Thank
news.
you. Only
For the rest of Sure.
so we don't have
I talked to
action, we do have action. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have action. We're in it.
Didn't do all that work for nothing.
We're in it. We're in it. No, Avi's been waiting for
Been
this,
crunching
so.
numbers for 3 weeks.
Okay, so do we want to do this the way, Pam, the way you suggested, just go brief through the subcommittee reports and then land with this? Okay.
And I would do
In
all of
first.
the other reports
Yeah.
and then go finance to budget
Yep,
and tie it all together.
got it. Okay, negotiations. Chris?
Negotiations are ongoing. There's no major update as of yet, but we do believe they are progressing well.
It's mostly just approving invoices at this point, as Jake
Final
knows.
details.
Yeah, final details, approving invoices and hoping to transition out of having to have that by new year, that is what I was told. Policy. So we have Erica on policy and Jake on communications. Erica.
Yes, we finalized our review of MASC's updates to the fiscal management section of the policy manual. We're going to present these updates at the 11:15 meeting and recommend that the school committee adopt these updates, other than the single signer update, which we are going to recommend that we hold off on until we all are a little bit more familiar with the process, and we will take up consideration of that proposed change at a later time. We are also in the process of drafting a reserve policy. We're looking to other districts, and as I think Anna suggested last week, we're also looking to the towns. Our plan is to propose a framework and language to the committee, and leave the target dollar amounts for the finance subcommittee to opine on. We're going to focus on the language itself and the framework. So yeah.
Thank you, Erica.
And we just learned that we not only are a policy subcommittee, but a
Yeah.
policy/communication subcommittee. So
Well, it
it's-
depends on the year, really.
So maybe with
It felt like a good time to revive the
Yeah,
title.
yeah.
Yeah. So Eric and I both volunteered for this communications charge without realizing that, so it
Good of
actually
you.
works out well.
Yes.
So we think we carried out the charge that you all gave us at the last meeting, which was to identify groups and contacts for kind of more community outreach oriented stuff. Pam provided us the plan that the school committee had for past efforts that, included many of the kind of now standard mechanisms for getting the word out from Pam's office. And so we've added to that this kind of listserv community network component to it. And adding principal newsletters, making sure that it goes out to principal newsletters. So with that, I think we also talked about the fact, well, not in our charge, we think it's important that we can start to consider messaging for upcoming November and December events. So I think we're looking to you all for that charge. or to start thinking about that. I know we still have planning to do in terms of what the process looks like and what, you know, we're asking for at major events. But we think we can at least start crafting some messaging so that there'll be something on the table for us to consider as that shapes up.
Thank you. Excellent. Do you have a question?
Yeah, is it time to ask?
Briefly, yes.
Oh, so, you know how you guys were in charge of, looking at the different ways of, the communicating or just bring awareness? At what point do we make a decision about what we would do?
I think that's what he just said. We're going to start looking at that in a future meeting.
Oh,
That
that's
they've
one.
created the
We have the
and-
list of,
Yeah.
that took, anybody who gave us input on organizations to outreach to. We've added that to kind of that network list. So essentially what happens when we are ready to publicize an event, like November 15th meeting that we have. You know, Pam's got her list of, goes out on her newsletter and Facebook post or whatever it may be. It's now going to also include this kind of social network list.
Oh, got it.
Like, we would be ready to go, right? So if the group doesn't want to do it, I intend on doing it. So we've got the Habib report. So we kind of want to get the word out. I think it's a good dry run activity.
Mhm.
So we're going to go with our typical, upcoming school committee meeting, what it is, why it's important. So kind of like a post. And then all it is a workflow chart that just kind of says where things get posted, who sends things to whom. And now they've been great at kind of getting that external network together. If you are all okay with it, we're ready to roll.
Okay. Great. We haven't seen any. Do we need to see anything, or are you making a recommendation that you feel confident moving forward?
I think we're confident. We're certainly happy to share the list that we have.
Yep, and we'll share the communications as
Great.
they're getting ready to come out.
Okay. So I guess the only thing left would be if anyone is interested in assisting with any of this, to just be in touch with Pam directly. I'm
I'll be honest,
glad
I
as
think
chair
we
to
have
do.
hands because
Okay,
I think a
got it.
lot of it's pre-done, right?
Okay.
So we have a package from past years.
Yeah.
And we can upgrade the package.
Mhm.
But we have a package of things that can go out, and we also have the assistance of the PR firm.
Yep.
So I can take the ready for budget season
Yep.
template, send it to them, punch it up, circulate it in the group, say, anybody have any inputs to share? And then boom, we're done and we're ready to go. And then it's just push it out and execute. So I don't think there's a ton of work. I think the big piece we think we want to start talking about is was a really great point was made. That's communication out. What's the desire for inputs in?
Right.
And what does that look like? So,
And that'll factor into the messaging of each
Right.
event, right?
Right.
What are we looking for?
Okay.
so no budget message yet, just
Yep.
the awareness piece that you sent the church. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Great.
Steal anyone's thunder.
Thank you. Well, great. Go for it. We don't need a vote,
I don't
right?
think
It's
so.
just, yeah, go forth and do. What is it?
Yeah,
I struggled with that. Trying, but my
myself.
thumb's busted. Help. Okay.
Keep going.
We still have that many
Teresa,
people.
can I give you a quick, just to add on to the facilities update?
Yes,
We
please.
did have a very exciting development, which is that the Gale team did go through the Conservation
Mhm.
Commission for both fields and did get approval with what they call the RDA format, which is basically a simplified process, as we have been saying all along, that we thought we would get rather than a full notice of intent. There was some discussion about whether to expand it and to have a much deeper dive, which typically comes to peer review in many, many more months. But ultimately, I think the same information they've brought to us helped to just say there's a lot of information at the ready.
Yeah.
And so that's great. So that means is that we're going to be on target for the same timeline for putting out bids and getting things done, which is, I believe the bids are supposed to be going out just around Thanksgiving break.
Great, thank you. Yes, Jake.
The other big news about the memorial project is we got LEED gold certification.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you know what?
Which means that if we were aiming for silver, which
Right.
means that we actually got a better rating than we anticipated based on energy savings and design efficiencies and whatnot. Yeah.
I reported on that at the Essex Quarterly Boards meeting and
Yeah.
forgot to include it here.
There's a
Yeah.
press
Sorry,
release
what's that?
getting,
Real quick,
we're
what is it?
waiting for them to send, not him,
LEED
but
Yeah.
is
them
is
to send me
a
the details.
sustainability and
Yeah.
environmental designation. And MSBA has given us 2% reimbursement points off of the base to hit the LEED silver standard. Anything over and above that
Off
is
the face of what, sorry?
so all eligible costs, they give you a formula of what they reimburse. And so our
Oh, okay,
reimbursement rate
gotcha.
is 35.9%. It'd be 33.9 if it weren't for our lead silver designation, but without needing to throw more money at trying to get to a higher level, the team was able to get us to gold, which is a really nice designation. And, you know, this building, for those who've seen the signs and the placards that are all around it, was very early, one of the leaders in statewide in environmental sustainability and construction. And so it's just great to see that tradition continuing. So.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you
thanks for
for
reminding me.
noting that.
Does it
Thank
give
you.
us- So did it give us more?
Doesn't give us more money.
No,
No, everyone asks that question.
sadly, no.
It gives our children a better earth
Yes.
and also provides a lot of instruction around.
And potentially longer term safety.
There we go.
Right, yeah.
That's a good point.
And I have our finance subcommittee report from our meeting yesterday. We met with our school committee treasurer, Charlie Lane, who has been serving the district since its inception. Close.
2004-ish, maybe.
Close, okay. For a very, very long time, and he is preparing to retire. We were able to meet him, ask our questions, which is wonderful. We've had for the last couple meetings, the job description for looking for a new treasurer to replace him. And so we were able to ask him questions based on our review of that. And also, in the course of that conversation, it came forth that incoming, in future packets, we at some point will likely start seeing his treasurer's report. So along with Avi's notes and the voucher details, we'll also get a copy of his monthly treasurer's report, which we can expect. So if you see something coming, that's what it is. And you're welcome to ask questions about it at that point. We also had a chance to look at the budget to actual and the transfer requests, go through that in detail, ask all our questions, get them explained by Avi, which he's going to do now for us anyway. And begin a conversation about starting to, over the course of the year, discuss our long-term goals for business practices, accounting practices, 18 to 24 month outlook, not things that we are necessarily capable of changing in the moment, but looking at a longer term plan. So that was our meeting. And with that, it's time to let Avi.
Yeah, and
Fine.
we've been through a very long meeting tonight, so I think I'm gonna spare people a very long deep dive into this, other than to provide a couple of high level points. So first,
That's the sheet you want?
yeah, if you can go to the next one that has the commentary on it and maybe just, yes. Yeah, and you can make that bigger, thank you. So, we talked about how, part of what we do throughout the year is make sure that school committee is aware of not only a forecast of where we're running by the budget categories that you oversee, but also areas where we think that there may be overages and how to cover those with areas that there should be a savings from. So that's a process that we get your approval on so that we can update the budget and meet our and your statutory obligation to ensure that spending by large category area is also being managed in accordance with your approval. So what we do is look for areas where the forecast is telling us that we're going to end over budget, and we take that exact amount over. It's a forecast. It's our best assessment off of our modeling, and transfer money into that category to bring the budget right up to where we think it'll end, so that we don't anticipate that overage will exist. So any area where you see a variance that's a negative, that means we think we might go over. And if I could just poke through some of these, well.
Yep.
So I'll be very quick about this, but if you look at this is what Pam actually asked me to be first. I told her no, but so sorry, Pam. But the fiscal year forecast there, if you compare that to the budget, you can see, for example, superintendent's office, which isn't Pam, we'll get to that in a second, is looking to be over by 27,000. And so we want to transfer in 27,000. And when you add 257 first column with the transfer request to increase the budget by 27.5, you'll get a new budget of 284. That number is right in line with what we think the forecast is going to be. So we're just increasing the budget to match what we think our forecast will be. Yes.
Just a point of clarification.
Yeah.
So, when you're asking us to do this transfer request, that's based on a forecast, not because you've actually already gone over.
Correct, in some cases. There may be some cases where the spending could already be over. It's unlikely this early in the year, but certainly as the year progresses, especially for June, we're gonna be doing some cleanup at the end of the year. And so just like we have accounts payable vouchers that we approve before the cash goes out the door, but payroll vouchers that go out subsequent because of wage and hour laws that require us to pay people. Part of this is that normal balancing act with how to keep operations running and making sure that we're giving you guys disclosure. So there is a little bit of flexible mindset that we need to have to make this work, but that's where this process, I take your feedback. If we want to adjust how we do it, by all means. So hopefully that's the formulaic explanation of how this works. You know, when we talk to different people about is negative good or bad, people have different ideas about how to view it. But I'm going to move this forward to the slides where you can see the explanation. So this is to allow for the comments. We just have the highlights, which is old budget, how much over if it's negative, how much we're going to put back in to make it right back in, and that 284 should bring us right in line with the forecast. So, you know, a couple highlights now about the categories that you can see. First, we did present a central office reorganization back in, I think, February, which we implemented. It's 99% complete. That's not a mathematical percentage. So you can see that there are FTE going between categories. So for example, we took down 1/2 FTE in the student services office for support, but we bumped up supporting not only Pam, but the district administrators and everyone in the office, 1 FTE there. So that's why the superintendent's office is up. The business office, you can see some of the differential there relates to not only the payroll clerk that the auditors talked about, that's still an open position. It's been tough to find that, just like we've been talking about other areas like the trainer, where hourly support people are really hard. It's a part-time position, you know, at not the highest wage in the world. So it's been tough to fill. We are looking to see if we can do some temporary staffing with the staffing firm, if we can get the right price. So you can see some of those changes, the ones that are, you know, savings down below, for example, in the athletics area. This is just the personnel side. You can see how we had reduced significantly the athletics FTE for the administrative assistant position there through that restructuring, where now we have essentially a half-time FTE. There's also some coaching savings. So that reorganization is one big theme. Another big theme that we talked about was the fact that we have been saying since August, we do have extra FTE at the high school. We know we've talked about some of the struggles that we've had with staffing, and we wanted to make sure that we had that in place. Pam's better to speak to that than me, but it's something we felt would be essential, especially given everything we've been hearing tonight. Fortunately, there are other areas where the staffing has come in better than budget. We had one position, for example, on the special education staff that was hard to fill, and we think it needs to be open for next year. But for this year, we've managed to cover it through other staffing juggling and in some cases, some teaching assistants. So those are some of the big areas. We did have a question about the savings in psychologists that came up earlier. I thought that was a great question. And I think, you know, Allison was going to be able to help us answer it, but the short answer is to differentiate between what psychologists and adjustment counselors do. So, and Pam can speak to this better than me, and if you want to take it, I can give it to you.
I really do.
Yeah.
So what we did was twofold. We were overstaffed in psychologists at the elementary level for our current enrollment. At the time, we went to a 1 adjustment counselor, 1 psychologist model. Essex was 280 plus students and Memorial was 430 students. We're now 220 and 250 thereabouts. Those are estimates. So for caseload, average caseload for a school psych should be around 500. That's a fit. I also want to differentiate between the role of a school psych versus the role of the adjustment counselor. The adjustment counselor is the one charged with more of the day-to-day SEL work, where the psychologist is primarily an arm of special education tasked with testing analysis, evaluation meetings, and then sometimes some prescribed psychological services through an IEP. So they're not doing the generalized work of SEL. And Allison was very confident that we could make it work with the 2 people. We originally took only a $25,000 savings for the reason that she was concerned with some of the increases in requests for evaluation that were coming out of special ed, that we may need to hire some contract services to cover some of the overages at either of the two levels. We haven't really realized that yet. So no impact to SEL. Schools who had excess psychologist time started to develop some structures in school to fill that time, and those were reorganized.
We did also, just as a reminder, it's kind of slightly history, but not that long ago. We did put in an additional adjustment counselor into the budget. It was originally funded through COVID funds for the first year, but then in the second year, it rolled into the FY '23 budget. So that's, I believe, at the high school level.
Yep.
So to your question about those support services, that's been kind of beefed up on the social, emotional, and student support side. So I think those are some of the main themes on this side here. I'm just scanning very briefly. A lot of the other things that you might see could be turnover when someone retires. You can have some noticeable savings in certain areas. And so that can impact us here as well. And then if we move to the next page, Pam, do you mind?
No.
Thank you. Which is the operating expenses. This is personnel. So the first category is one that Anna had asked about first, which is district administrative expenses, where we have a lot of the administrative technology. So I spoke to some of those changes that are in there. It's also been absorbing the portion of, while we had in budget an IT support position that we had restructured for as part of our restructuring plan, that is supposed to be up on the personnel side. It just took a few months to be able to get that person on board. So the person who's now here is going to be in the personnel side, but prior to that period, when they're going to be in the contract period, that portion of their expense is down in the operating expense side. I'm just going to look here. I think one of the major categories I want to bring to your attention is not on here, which is out of district, which is that right now we're kind of where we thought we would be. It's a very volatile area. Of all the ones with the forecast that things do tend to change during the year, that's the one that I think we need to continue to monitor. Fortunately, I do get very frequent budget updates from Allison Collins that we use and will be a big part of how we budget for fiscal '24. Transportation for those students, we've been saying for a couple months now, is going to be above. One of the questions that I received is, why is it so expensive? It is shockingly expensive. It is a statewide crisis. It is such a huge problem that the state made the fairly unexpected and beneficial move to start integrating out-of-district transportation costs into the circuit breaker program on a phased-in basis, 25%, then 50%, then 75% of eligible costs. So we're moving through that. We are getting those reimbursements bit by bit each year, but to the question of what can be done, the short answer is not as much as we'd like. But the detailed answer is, first, we do go out to bid for every placement. We have a new part of the restructuring. We have a new person who's helping with out-of-district transportation. As Allison said to me, the person who used to do it was very good at it. The new person is named Sean Kucharski, who's with us. He's been doing a great job with it. He has a lot of experience with negotiation, even though he's a young and new person in this role. And he is really working the phones. And so that's yielded some savings, but we're still over budget. So it's not really a positive story. The other thing that people ask about sometimes is whether or not you could consider at some point insourcing transportation, which is certainly something that we've talked about a lot because the numbers are so high. And my business-minded association with outsourcing is that it's not common to yield cost savings. It's more about managerial pros and cons. And from my perspective, what that would do is make us need to be specialized in recruiting for drivers. The number one thing to remember is that the IEP compliance issues are very significant. And so you need to not only have drivers at the ready, but a stable core of backup people. Because on any day when someone's out, it's your problem. You got to get that route done. And essentially, part of the reasons the costs are so high is because the companies themselves, who are essentially recruiting companies with buses, they're struggling to do that. And so they're having to pay more to get people. One of the things they have told us, which I was delighted to hear from Sean, is that if we can get our orders in for next year earlier than other people, the sooner we start to commit to routes, the better. So we're not gonna do any like hedging and speculative contracts. But we are going to find if there's a way to figure out students that we know have a high likelihood of going, to get those out as soon as we possibly can and to jump the line. So he's ready to go and he really wants to help us. It's been very great to see him kind of shine in that area. So I'm really psyched about that. So the only other areas I think we want to talk about, a big one, obviously insurance and other benefits. We talked about the fact back in August that we were expecting a much smaller improvement, and that was related to the fact that we had budgeted a 10% rate increase, but we ended up getting it, I think, like 8.9%, not a huge differential. That was a little disappointing. But one of the reasons I like to hold my first forecast until now is because this is the time of year where you not only know your staffing compared to what you thought your staffing was going to be in February, but you also know who's on benefits, who's on what plans. All of that changes when people come and go. And so by early October, you have a very good sense of who's on the plans. That doesn't tend to change a ton. So we've really continued to benefit in this year with some of those changes. First of all, some of the younger folks have tend to come on to single plans versus family plans. Some of them are coming on with their families, so they're not on our benefits. And then we continue to see some migration with retirees onto Medicare as a percentage of the total. That's a lower cost program for us. Just order of magnitude, maybe it's like instead of a $23,000 family plan, you might be talking about a $6,000 annual commitment for a Medicare supplement plan. So that migration has continued to move. I've talked about how retiree health is growing, I think around 10 to 12% per year. So it's a huge budgetary challenge for us. Having said that, the cost per person is going down. We really have an increase in heads. That's the number one driving factor there. So it's a mix of good news there. It's a pretty complicated picture, but overall, we are seeing that we should be ending this year in the black on insurance. Part of the reason is it's all based off how we thought we would end last year. So our budget for 23 was take last year where we thought it would be back in December, January, where we thought we would end, and put a growth rate on it. And we ended up being better than budget last year too. So I think hopefully that will help us a little bit as we move into 24 budgeting. I'm just going to scan. I think I've really hit the major areas just to see if there's anything else. We talked about in transportation, how we had the $150,000 of excess revenue last year. So that's helped to lower those expenses. The last two big themes I think I would talk about before we wrap up are one, remember, even if we are looking to end the year right now with a forecast that's better than budget, we have $520,000 operating deficit, not to mention other one-time funds that are in our budget on top of the use of E&D. So let's just say $350,000 doesn't get spent. I will virtually guarantee that number will be lower by the end of the year. But let's just say that materialized, you'd still be essentially $270,000 or $170,000 in the hole just on your structural deficit, not to mention the other one-time funds that we've put into the budget in other areas. So we're trying to get from in a really dangerous position to a slightly better position as we manage the budget going forward. The other thing is that for some of these changes, some of the savings we're seeing this year is one time and will not recur next year. For example, that transportation aid, that's money we're not going to make back next year. And so what you can see in the next to last line, of the 354,000, about $295,000 of that is one-time savings. For example, on the special ed line, we have some savings up above, some of which is just an open position that I mentioned that didn't get filled. We need that position. Maybe we'll save in some other areas if we fill it, because we won't need, 2 for 2, but there is a lot of the savings that we don't expect to recur in a future year. So I definitely would not be popping the champagne based on these results. We have a structural deficit that is very stressful to me as I think about keeping this district strong. Revenue correction is absolutely necessary. We're using one-time funds to support our budget. Having said that, it's good to know that where we are in October is tracking well for this year. That will help us. So that's my 5-minute thing in 30 minutes.
And an important one. Are you willing to take questions?
Of course.
Excellent. I will begin. So I just have I have one question that's not for answering right now.
Okay.
But I know for me, it would be helpful, and so maybe for others too, because I've had the question come to get at some point a history of understanding about transportation in the district, insourcing versus, bring in-house versus outsourcing buses, that used to belong to towns or didn't, and that sort of thing. Again, I don't,
Sure.
it's just part of the conversation because it's such a big cost. And of course, we all know there's a national, shortage
General
right
ed
now.
transportation or
Yes,
special ed?
general ed as well. So the how to talk about, knowledgeably and with context about, well, why don't we just get our own buses? You have three buses, that sort of thing. I'm not saying we solve that right now.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that as,
And I think it also ties to feedback that we hear about the
Yes.
quality of the service, which has been bumpy, to be honest, with the shortage of staffing that they've seen, even though they've been a long time partner. So
Yeah.
we'd be happy to address it.
at some point when there's time and bandwidth. And then the question I have directly about this though is forecasting on utilities.
Oh,
So
yeah, I didn't mention that.
how,
Well, it's in there.
how reasonable is this though? Like, where are we in terms of knowing what
Yeah,
the rates
so-
will?
So I had kind of been holding off on budget estimates because I really didn't feel like I could give a great picture, partly because we have multiple different contracts
Yeah.
locked in at different timeframes. Not to mention that those tend to be for supply, but a big part of what you pay for is also just the infrastructure and distribution.
Mhm.
And all those costs are changing in different ways based on different factors.
Mhm.
But we have a energy purchasing consortium that we work with, Power Options. I've mentioned them before. They helped us with the solar panel program. They do bulk volume purchasing. They work primarily with higher ed organizations, but also with municipals. And so they have developed new budget forecasting capabilities for their members. We pay short money to have them as an advisor, a couple $100 a year, maybe, $800 to $1,000 a year. And so for about $1,000, we're able to access some of their forecasting skills. So they have developed a preliminary version of a model, which is how we got these numbers. They're going to be refining it. So I'd say this is a much better read than that I had previously.
Okay.
So I feel pretty good about it, but
Okay.
it's still way early, and all of their data is based, well, we know the rates, because those have been locked in. It is based on the assumption of that usage will be similar to last year. And that is a question. I can tell you, in addition to asking Jason to get rid of all the storage units this summer, the other thing I said was we need to have as much effort as we can on energy usage over this year, more than ever, because we can't just focus on the price. We have to focus on what we're using. Flashback to COVID, remember, we are using our air handling, air return units more for more hours of the day. A lot of fresh air intake, that was all part of the COVID plan. So as things are returning to normal, we're still doing that, but maybe not, the guidelines from the CDC have adapted over time and adjusted. So we're gonna look at what we can do. We obviously want to keep fresh air intake during flu and cold season high. But we're gonna do everything we can to manage our energy usage over the year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a long answer, sorry.
No, that's what I'm here to get. Anyone else have questions for Abby about the budget to actual report?
How consistent do some of our special ed expenses remain year to year? So like the out of district transportation or out of district tuition is,
Biggest wild cards we have.
okay, so we have no idea. Right now, do you have any
we
idea if
have-
next year will look like this year? Based on where these students are and.
I'd give you my answer. You can give yours first.
The gamble.
I think we have good visibility on what we know in-house on who may or may not be thinking or be on a trajectory for out of district, but we have absolutely no line of sight on who may move in or move out of district
Or agent.
or age in. Well, we know our agents for the most part because they're involved in our pre-K program. So we
I
begin
meant agent into the pre-K program, but yes.
agent,
Don't we also know?
we do an early child.
Our
fund.
age outs, like,
We do.
could
do.
we be anticipating any?
That is on the forecasting process.
Yeah.
It will, it's not gonna be an area of savings for next year, maybe
Okay.
25.
I would, though, to your first question, if you look at the full budget document, the student services page, it does show you the multi-year trajectory. It also shows you the part that hits the budget And the part that's funded through offsets,
Mhm.
like circuit breaker or grants, prepayments that we do with end of year savings, that's where your data is. If you really want to see what that trend is, what I have seen is that it did. Sorry, for many years, it came down from a high point as we built the in-district programs. Now, primarily, as we've talked about, the people who are going out are kids who can't be served with in-district programs and for whom an in-district program can't really be built. Which often means that type of need might be higher and more specialized with a higher cost tuition. So you can see that I think over the past 2 years, there has been a steady uptick. I think this year where we're at is a little bit stable compared to where we were in last budget season, so slightly good news, but as Pam said, we don't really know.
I just always want to throw the wet blanket on it. And it's not on the tools or the forecasting or the monitoring, because that's all there. But just in day-to-day conversation, I get we may have a potential new one coming, somebody else just moved out. So it is volatile on a week-to-week basis. So it is something that could take that 354 and take it down to 100 in one day. So it just,
We do
even
see
with
changes.
everyone's good efforts.
Yeah, and we started at the presentation, we're saying this is an area that we should expect changes mid-year. Unlike staffing, where you really tend to know what you've got for the year, and unlike benefits, which are more stable, this is one that does change throughout the year, and it does have a big impact when it does.
In transportation right there with it, because you could have a change in placement external, where now you're doubling your mileage.
They track together in that way. Yep, that's true.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll be quick.
Sure.
Yeah, because I'll be thinking because we went over this hours yesterday. So just two things. One is the substitute teachers.
Mhm.
In September 20th meeting, you mentioned that potentially that is going to go over the budget by 100K. So why are we here only asking to transfer 14K?
Well, I think at the time, part of what we were talking about might have been the 2 FTE that are brought in that are now in the classroom teacher realm, because we weren't sure if they were going to be substitutes or if they were going to be additional staff. They are additional staff, the way we have them structured right now.
So you're saying that the substitute, now they're full-time instead of the substitute. line. So it's
Correct.
the line.
Yes,
the budget line.
and I will tell you that the substitute line is another one that I do expect to have new information and changing expectations as the year goes on. We have daily subs, that's kind of stable from year to year. That's not really where the money tends to be painful. It's when you have a person on an extended leave and you have essentially one person being paid on leave through the sick benefits and a new person who's on a long-term sub plan. So right now, we did an estimate based on the potential short-term but longer-term, medium duration leaves. Think, for example, maybe
4 to
it's
6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks. Maybe it's a maternity situation or something like that, that we know it's confined in time. So we've done a little bit of math around what that could be. It's very preliminary. So I don't feel like I have, that's a number that I feel like we need more time to see how that shapes out. Plus, there's always surprises that can happen there that we don't know about. Someone gets sick or has a family member who gets very sick, that can definitely impact that.
Okay. My last question is, if you go to the bottom.
Yeah.
The next page. Shouldn't the negative 325 less the general fund, less the funded outside the general fund also be in the forecast and also revised budget? Meaning that your bottom line general fund operating spending now.
Oh,
is
yeah, I just
actually-
didn't copy that line.
Right,
But yeah,
it's-
yeah,
right
that's,
now it's 325.
there's no change to that. I apologize for not copying that line.
Right,
over.
but this needs to be adjusted because your bottom line is 325K overstated.
Yeah, it just, I didn't format it properly. What I'm asking you guys to approve is the budget transfers through this document, but you're right, that's just an omitted number there. I apologize. It's sloppy.
Another thing that, I know most people here probably don't care, but I think because this is a proper forum for any finance people, because for us finance people, we do look at things differently. What I learned yesterday is our school budget and how we're capturing things is based on cash. It's cash basis instead of accrual basis. And this does change how we look at things when we look at year to the actual and what forecasting meant. Just for the record, I want to state that.
Yeah, it's really an important point.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jake.
So I don't think this impacts anything that you've presented or have here, but kind of looking ahead, how do we talk about kind of program needs? So, you know, are there ways we can indicate in the commentary rather than just saying an FTE, you know, 0.5 change or something like that? Is there a way, I'm trying to figure out how we can eventually, not for this today, but how do we tell a bit more of a program story or program implication of some of these things? Right? Maybe it's how we group some of the code, you know, the account lines or in the commentary. I'm just trying to think about and again, we tend to have this almost every meeting, like we have a really kind of in-depth program conversation, and when we jump to budget, it becomes this totally different conversation.
Yeah.
Separate from that, right? So I'm just wondering how we would tell a little bit more of a budget, a little bit more of a program narrative as it relates to the budget changes.
That's a good question. Ooh, to you.
And we don't have to answer it now.
No,
but-
and I take the point in that I think that's a separate conversation. I feel like I need to go on the record and say, I think budget transfers have been done in under 15 minutes for 12 years. I think consent agenda has been done with exceptions, but you know, within the first 15 minutes of meeting. We're spending 2.5 hours of prep and then another 1.5 hours at the meeting on some just basic routine accounting functions. So I agree in the budget story, we need to be talking program. This is just, we need to make the transfers, we need the public disclosure and the
Yeah.
public okay to do it. Here's what we're seeing. Can we have the okay so we can get on to other things? So I'm hoping that we can work on streamlining some things because it's really, you know, I'm growing concerned as if the very base level routine functions are taking 2.5, 3, 4 hours for processing. That's after all of the time going in to try to make them understandable. When we're getting into complexities of the budget and wanting to talk big picture attached to numbers, I don't know that we're gonna have the time to do it all.
So that's on us. That becomes partly on us as a committee to be aware and exhibit restraint in some ways, and we have to find ways of learning that don't involve necessarily asking more hours wise, because that is an important thing. We're gonna need to do that. We're gonna need them to do that. So we're gonna have to work through some of that.
And I know I raised the question just because I have no other forum or outlet
course.
to raise.
Of course,
So that's why I raised it here.
The comment wasn't in combatants
Yeah.
of that.
No.
It's in that we
Yeah.
need to get to that level of discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the pathway. I'm not sure how to help facilitate it.
I will say on this one in particular, so I think this is, I don't know if we've done we might have done a transfer in June.
Yeah,
with-
when I think people were new.
Yes, exactly. So it was still
I
very
did.
new. You might have been
Yeah.
at the time.
Was
I
it
don't know.
June
Oh, no, if it was June, then it would have included.
Yeah, I think it had all the new members.
And discussion has to be had and
Yeah.
questions need to be answered. That's just,
But now that we know, so for instance, we know what a transfer means as a committee. We understand that we're looking to
Yeah.
move from categories that are under to over, you know,
Yeah. And I
what
didn't
that
state,
means, and we
because I
can.
always stated it's kind of, is that the total budget does not change by statute. And to your point about the offset not being shown there, it is a very important point because the total number is the same.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you mentioned it. I apologize. I didn't copy that number over because I'm so focused on what's changing and transferring. But you're right, we are not changing the budget. To change the budget, if it goes up, we've got to bring it back to town meeting.
Yeah.
If the assessments don't change, there's a way they can improve it on a rapid basis. But, so yes, there's no change to the total budget here.
So hearing all of that then, first of all, Avi, thank you. So this is a change in process for our administration, for our business manager, adding 2 budget to actual report outs, the preparation for it, not just having the budget transfers be part of the meeting with a quick little report. This is new and it's been an enormous amount of work for them. So thank you. I know that it's good learning for us, but also I know our town partners really appreciate it as well. I know there were people looking forward to this meeting for
Right.
that, you know, either on replay or joining. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But you do have action that is required of us. So the motion, I would entertain a motion to approve the budget transfers as presented. And that is all the language we needed, is as presented in the document. Is there a motion on the table? Is there a second? Any discussion further?
I have a question. You said that this was an operational change for us as a committee.
Mhm.
Did we as a committee request this change?
Not officially. This was based on the discussion that we had at the summer workshop. When questions were asked, we were talking about what isn't happening. And as I recall, Tracy pointed out that districts typically do that.
Mhm.
And so on their own, Pam and Avi brought forth that they would add these two in. I know our town partners were hoping, based on conversation from the last year or two, to have one mid-year included. They have in fact included two, but it was not at our
There'll be
direction
three.
by
This was-
vote.
There'll be three. There's this one.
Yeah.
Which is typical of the time frame. We've done them in the past because we do it in prep for setting the budget base
Mhm.
for our work in December. We're gonna add one in January, which probably, right, isn't gonna look too different. More of a check-in in our budget process, and then one toward the end of the year.
Mhm.
I forgot what date we've set. So there'll
Typically,
be
it's the
three
last
within the-
meeting of the year, so we can get closest to the best available estimate of how we're gonna end. Yeah, the January one, I wouldn't expect too much to change, other than some of the areas that we've talked about out of district. I think it'll be a great time. Subs, any surprises in staffing, but staffing is mostly set. So I think it'd be subs out of district, and transportation would be some of the biggest areas. We'll have more on maintenance by then. We won't have a lot on utilities by then, because typically until you're through March and April, that's when you get those numbers, so. But we'll bring what we have. You know, I'm excited to provide more information to answer to your question. This is what a high functioning committee and business office can be doing. If we just are trying to constantly balance running lean and mean and managing what we do here for you and for the community with what we do on our day jobs, which is also time consuming. So thank you for the opportunity.
Any other brief
I
questions?
would say present it as is, with the exception that you do need to update it 325, because this become, that entire column become public document, yeah?
Okay, sure. I can put that back in. We can.
Except those total numbers matter.
Yeah, that's great.
But the transfers are
We're
correct.
voting
as
the
they are.
transfers. The
Yes,
transfers are
we're
correct.
voting
That's-
on the
that is
transfers.
correct.
Okay, move the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Zero. No, it's unanimous. Great. Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you for all that work.
Yeah.
Thank you all for holding up. All right, that is the end. We have school committee comment. Does anyone have comment? I have one comment. I think that it is going to be obvious. So as we learn and grow and ask all our questions and do these things, it is then incumbent upon us to show restraint in our meeting. And that's part of why it's so important that we send our questions in advance, that we do all of this, because we are, I will go out there and say, we as a committee, and again, it's not a bad thing in the moment, but we are taking a disproportionate amount of time from the full-time employment of our superintendent and business manager right now. We need to find a way to tackle that over time so that they can do their jobs. It's all important stuff. We've got process, they're very collaborative, but this is something for us to work out. So that's my comment for now. Anyone else have comment for the evening before we adjourn?
Sorry, my voice is awful. Are you talking about the amount of time spent at tonight's meeting, or are you talking about time in between meetings?
All together.
I just.
No, I'm not
Do you
specific-
think
I mean-
We asked too many questions at the meeting tonight?
I don't think so. I think that we could have streamlined the consent agenda process. I think that a lot of those questions could have been asked in advance. I know if they're able to be sent in advance, great. A good number of them could have been asked yesterday in our subcommittee meeting. So yeah, we can streamline some of this for sure. That's part of the idea. It's not. We have the chance to ask all of our questions. The timing of when we ask them and how we ask them is important so that we're being respectful of their time to actually do their jobs. So as we can get better at our understanding and learning in our jobs, we'll be enabling them to do the same. That's all. I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be.
You're talking about the questions that we were posing to the
Not at all.
administrators tonight.
No, I thought that was completely appropriate. That was a very long presentation. This is an
It was
unusually
about
long.
15. 12 minutes over what I thought it would be.
Okay. So, and we're gonna have some nights where there are long presentations. Next meeting, we're gonna
Well, I
have
was
a long
gonna, that was gonna be
presentation.
not a school committee comment, but just kind of a
A
preview of likely the next meeting. Well, we're gonna get the Habib report. When we get the Habib report is questionable, right? I mean, I don't know if I'm going to have it for a Wednesday delivery. We have no school on the Friday, so it would be a Wednesday delivery. It may be the case that we're sending it on Monday.
Yeah, they're working on
Quite
it
potential.
now. One thing that we did last time, and I think we should, I may have mentioned, I can't remember who I talked with about this, so if I'm a broken record, just stop me. But we're gonna get it in draft format so that you can ask questions. We can have them change or adjust anything if there's things, just like some of the comments that maybe Anna had about this process, just to clean it up before it gets finalized. That's gonna be a document that, with the last one, lived and breathed for, 5 to 7 years and really informed a lot of our very big strategic decisions around facilities. So it's gonna come in a mostly baked process, but not fully, so that we have the opportunity to change things as needed and have them come back with the final item. So that's the good news. I'm kind of pushing them on a daily basis to get things ready. So they still believe that we're gonna be hitting that deadline. I don't know exactly when I'm gonna see my first draft before I can get it ready.
And that's all I wanted to
Yeah.
clarify, is that it likely won't be ready for long weekend preview.
Yeah.
You'll probably get it on the Monday, hopefully not the Tuesday morning. But I don't think we should reschedule it because there isn't an opportune time to reschedule it, as it informs a big chunk of thinking about the budget and how to frame things and how to, what the asks might be. So I'm gonna send it out as soon as we get it. We'll send out all of the voucher materials ahead of time. But that night will be split into two components. We need an executive session ahead of time for a hearing. A level 3 hearing is coming to us. So I'm gonna say at this point on that, but my hope would be to start that at 5 and finish that by 6:15, 6:30, and then go right into a Habib report and maybe recommend doing just any subcommittee reports. Sorry, brain's starting to shut off at the end of the meeting. And that way there, take as much time with Habib and questions in the moment as we need.
We're talking about the 16th, right? No,
If-
15th.
Yeah.
Tuesday.
And contemplating starting at 5, I need to put that in if we are.
I'm wondering if
If-
it's,
Yep, go ahead.
if, I know it would be helpful for me in putting it out there to the rest of the committee, if it would be knowing that that could be a potentially late and open-ended night, if meeting remotely would be an option or would be preferable for anybody else.
I'll leave that to the group.
I think I'm comfortable with that as an accommodation, knowing that it will be a long one. If I'd be interested in your input about the receiving of the report, like
I think so.
of them
Just-
presenting.
So the way we did it last time was he did a PowerPoint set of slides that were high level off of the summary of the report. It's a big document. It goes through a lot of details that I don't think anyone will be able to fully read before then, no matter when we get it. And part of getting it in draft allows you to have time, just like when we do
Right.
2 reads for policy, you have the opportunity to take it back after you hear the high level summary, and then dig into it, and then you can come back at the subsequent meeting with feedback for me, or in the
Right.
intervening weeks, and I can give it to them, and then we can get finalized version back out to you. So we have flexibility.
Okay,
Less about that.
yeah.
And I'm gonna turn the question back on you guys again and say, we've had discussion, always at the end, but about engagement and in bringing in community. I think it can be done both ways. I'm not rendering a recommendation or even an opinion,
Mhm.
just we're gonna go out, we're gonna start to message that this is coming, that we're inviting the public, that it's an important piece of charting the future. I'd leave it to you guys to think about, do you want to do that and invite an audience to come in? Or do you think you'll get more of an audience if it's on? I don't know. I don't know what to recommend, but
Yeah. The final, just to clarify on that, is the hearing required to be in person? Or is there an expectation
did-
either way? I'm just
the
curious.
budget hearing,
No, the executive
Executive
session. Does that need to be in person?
attorney is on site that day for another
Okay.
matter and will be here, so that's why we
Either
picked
way.
that date.
I
Yeah,
see. Got
But
it.
it can be done either way.
Okay. Jake?
Is the next meeting long because of the Habib report, or are we also doing kind of budget process work.
Executive session could be report.
Yeah.
General reports.
We have on that, because we have, I know your
We
question, we
have-
have first report out on budget development listed for that day. But now that we have an executive session for that, that may or may not take
Our
place.
budget development at that point can be done in 10 minutes.
Okay,
Or report on that.
so that would
Or
be
can
quick.
we put a short time to talk about process? Because it's gonna, what kind of, I don't know how else we're gonna have that conversation about, the December public meeting.
December 6th is all budget. There's no other. our
But how do
part-
we,
Part can be small if you want to do your part.
right, but how do we frame that? What kind of input are we asking? How do we have that conversation if it's not in a school committee meeting?
Maybe this is wrong, but we're gonna talk about a lot of those in the subcommittee meeting, right? So maybe you
About
can
what?
come, self-finance, maybe you can come
So I
join.
think you're talking less about the
Quick point of
numbers.
clarification,
Yeah.
11:15, what we would typically, so we will be getting, budget packets will go out to principals hopefully tomorrow.
They will tomorrow.
They will have 2 weeks to prepare their budgets and submit them to us. 2 weeks is gonna bring us right up until 14th or 15th, right? Tomorrow is the 2nd. From there, we will start to weed through everything that comes in. I mean, it won't be a surprise to us. I mean, we have a routine and a process.
Yeah.
And we'll start to construct the district level superintendent's budget. If we have anything to discuss or offer on the 15th, it would be no different really than what we talked about tonight, because we went through pretty much in depth. Things that we're watching, things that we anticipate being budget busters. So we'll be able to tell you that we don't have a healthcare number yet. So we're gonna use probably I don't even know if we'll have the assumption at that point, but maybe if we have an assumption, we would report that. We already talked a little bit about OOD, doesn't look to get better next year. Going to be a wild card. We kind of talked a little bit about our starting place with the utilities, so you're starting to see pieces.
Yeah.
That would be part of our early level
Okay.
discussion. That's separate from, those are kind of,
Right.
when we say building the budget, those are the pieces we're talking about. On the 6th, you're gonna see the draft budget.
Right.
And then the first input for community is on our schedule currently is on the 15th of December,
Yeah,
14th.
whatever the hearing date is on that.
Jake's question is totally separate.
Yes, so if that's the case, then if we recognize now that, again, we work off this calendar and we recognize that it's dynamic, right? So there's not going to be much of budget development update on here for November 15th. Can we take that piece and appropriate a small amount of time to discussing what Jake's is saying? We can't take, it can't be the full discussion, but we can at least get started so that we have 2 meetings before that hearing is going to take place. Reasonable?
That'd be great.
Okay, let's do that. Good. Okay. Unless there's anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Did you have something else?
Just wanna say I'm doing better. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm doing better.
Questions are not a problem. Space was made for me to ask millions
Get
of
there.
questions. So
We
we
will
can
get
get
there.
through questions. Oh, no, we didn't.
I was going to ask, Kate, would it be at all helpful to, rather than tack on executive session, I don't know, even know if this is possible, but could we do executive session earlier in the day? Like, would that shorten the window? that
It's
you're
really
asking?
just, no, it's just having I need to arrange
Meeting that.
childcare, and to arrange childcare, I need to be able to tell somebody when I will be.
I'll just say we're likely to get more audience for the Habib report if it's online.
I agree. I do agree with that, but I also see value
We're
in
always
being in
online, right?
person for the
Well,
hearing.
right, yeah, I mean, they can listen in.
Can we do, did we decide we're not willing to do both? Like, could we?
I don't think time-wise, it makes sense to do one in person and then go.
No, I meant, can Kate be at home if she needs to be at home and we can be here if the presenter here?
We had, well, this is something, and we don't have time for it right now, but this is a further discussion that we never got to the end of. We need to set some norms. So if one person can't make it, if 2 people can't make it at time frame, so that it doesn't become this juggling standing question. I will say that the hybrid thing was my only sticking point in conversation about that. Is really distracting and difficult to manage a hybrid meeting.
Yeah, I didn't think it was video.
It's-
It's like half of our group is
it's just
here,
not-
half of it is online, you know.
It's just not
With
productive.
that, I mean, there's always, there could be an exception, right? I mean, It's not,
Well,
and it
well,
was
that's,
fine for 15 minutes, right, or whatever.
yeah, but also I can't be watching Anna for 15 minutes. The conversation is
Right.
here if the meeting's in, not because it was you, but you understand what I'm saying. You're on the
What's on the
screen.
table? Do you guys want to make it a virtual
Just make it
meeting
a
on the
virtual.
15th?
I'm fine with that.
Perfect.
Okay,
Sound excited.
right? Okay.
Get to wear
Great.
jeans.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were against it. I'm like, I'm trying to
I know,
figure
I
this
just-
out.
Just wanted to ask the question.
Yeah.
Whether or not we need,
Motion to adjourn. The legal.
He doesn't have
No,
to
they-
present
he
here.
can present.
We'll probably
Yeah.
be also saying first, well.
Yeah.
He's on the South Shore, isn't he?
Who's gonna make the
Yeah, he is
motion
on
to
the South
adjourn
Shore.
for?
Yeah, I need to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
Adjourn.
All in favor?
Hey.
Erica, I didn't see your vote. Are you trying to stay?
Guys, I don't even remember.
It's unanimous.